While everyone else woke up to a clean, wide lake, he got a muddy puddle. No wider than his height, dead last out of 8.4 billion survivors, meet Jang Hun. Then his deep hook system awakened, granting the unique talent catch forecast. It revealed his tiny puddle would not grow wider, it would grow straight down. The worst source in the migration reached a drowned world, turning the dead last joke into rank 1. Wide, shallow lakes run dry, but the deep never empties. Show some love by hitting subscribe. It really helps the channel grow, but how exactly did this insane survival game even begin? Let us look back to the exact moment everything changed, on the morning the world ended. Jang Hun was riding the train, counting how many days he could stretch his tiny paycheck. Suddenly the train vanished, the city disappeared, and he was standing in endless green grass. Fields stretched out in every direction, running all the way to the edge of the sky. It took him a long moment to process the absolute, deafening silence around him. Every normal city sound had vanished. There was only the wind brushing through endless fields. The grass went on forever, with absolutely nothing to break the horizon. Then, a cold voice spoke. It explained what was happening, delivering the message to every single human being at the exact same time. 8.4 billion people had been brought to this grassland world for a forced survival migration. Every survivor received exactly one water source and one single life to defend. That water source was everything. Food, tools, and survival depended entirely on it. Everything they needed came directly from whatever water the system had placed at their feet. Next, the system unlocked the ranking lists, along with regional and global chat channels. The marketplace was also opened, before the system left them with one final, ominous warning. The starter packs would not last, the brutal night would not wait for anyone. And critically, not everything that bit the hook would be a harmless fish. Everyone received a plot. Their individual plots of grassland were absolutely massive, spanning 1,000 acres per person. It was so vast that Jang Hun could not even see where his borders ended. His nearest neighbor was somewhere far beyond the horizon, completely out of reach. During those initial days, the only way survivors could interact was through the global chat. That chat was already blowing up with people sharing what they found at their centers. Most of them had lucked out with beautiful, wide lakes right in the middle. There was clean water, fish leaping from the surface, boats, and ready-to-use nets. One player even shared a picture of a lake that stretched to the horizon. But when Jang Hun walked to the center of his own land, he found a puddle. Hidden behind a patch of grass, it was a tiny brown puddle, barely as wide as his height. It was covered in mud and gave off a sour, stagnant smell when he leaned closer. Peering in, he saw exactly what he had to work with, just a few mudworms. There were some tiny shrimp smaller than a fingernail, but absolutely no fish or clean water. He barely had enough room to cast a line without hitting the opposite muddy bank. The global system ranking sorted everyone from the best water source to the absolute worst. There was a clear number next to his name, rank 8.4 billion, dead last. Out of everyone, this 20-year-old was the bottom of the barrel, and the chat noticed. Within 10 seconds, players were mocking him, calling him names centered around his sad puddle. Some even posted insulting drawings. He stared at that rank number once, then shrugged. Staring at a bad rank does not change the truth, and it certainly does not catch fish. While the lake owners spent their first day boasting online, he had to survive. There were much more urgent problems to deal with right now than online insults. The sun is already past noon, and the system made it clear that night won't wait. He shuts off the chat, kneels in the dirt, stares down at his gear. It is easily the worst fishing rod ever made, yet every starter pack was identical. It did not matter if the system gave you an ocean or a muddy puddle. 2 pieces of bread, 2 bottles of water, 3 lumps of bait, and 1 rod. A reward from the gacha, and luck hated him. The line is extremely thin. One wrong tug and it snaps, even the hook came out completely bent. The twisted point would just slide right out of a fish's mouth. Math was his only real survival skill, carried over from his old life. 3 years of stretching a paycheck and skipping lunches just to pay rent. He learned to the very penny what he could spend and what to save. Out here, a bottle of water represents another day of life he has to buy. And he does not have many days left, but the bent hook, he can fix that. He snaps a thorn off the dead grass to work the cheap metal straight. He works slowly so it does not snap, then he pinches some bait. Just a third of a lump, never the whole thing, only fools waste resources. Anyone who burns their supply on the first cast deserves whatever comes next. Meanwhile, beyond the horizon, the chat is exploding with reports of successful catches. They brag and compare their hauls. He mutters a curse and mutes them. He drops his crooked hook into the muddy brown puddle and waits. Suddenly the line twitches. He pulls, landing a gray, ugly mud shrimp the size of his thumb. It kicks weakly on the hook, completely worthless. He is about to toss it back. Then a bright blue screen flashes open right in front of his face, and a cold voice speaks directly into the quiet. The deep hook system has finally awakened. He freezes, absolute silence. Everyone else was still bragging in the global chat, showing off their unlocked talents, but not a single one. Got a message like this. The glowing text keeps writing water source identified. Classification, baby depth spring. Then a smaller line appears directly underneath. A depth spring does not grow wider, it grows deeper, every catch pulled from these muddy waters deepens the source itself, making rare things appear. Meanwhile, 8 billion people in the chat are measuring their luck. But look at this, the system just whispered a massive secret directly to him. It tells him that the surface size of the water does not matter. Wide, shallow lakes will eventually run completely dry, but his little puddle, it grows straight down, and down is where the real treasures are hiding. A third notification pops up, talent unlocked, catch forecast. Suddenly the water blurs, and for a brief second he sees 3 spectral shapes. They float beneath the surface, each carrying a heavy feeling he cannot describe. A cluster of mud shrimp sits near the top, easy catches but basically worthless. Bitter oil fish swims slightly deeper, offering more food but requiring more effort. And deep down, where the water turns pitch black, a massive shadow hums with power. He feels a chilling warning in his teeth before his mind can even process it. The new talent shows him what lies ahead and the exact cost of landing them. It does not make the choice for him. That is the beauty of this broken system. Every single cast is now a calculated decision instead of a blind gamble. He could either sit there and starve slowly or chase that strange humming sound in the depths. He needed to discover what the system meant by rarer, starting first with the oil fish. There was no way he would tackle the most dangerous beast before even standing up. Throwing his bait away was foolish. The fish fought slow and sour, dragging heavily in the mud. The fish tasted incredibly bitter and was almost inedible, but it was still food and valuable material. He cleaned the catch on a nearby stone, keeping the skin and oil. Setting the meat aside, he quickly went back and hooked 2 more shrimp. But on that second catch, he felt the muddy puddle shift right beneath his knees. Below the surface, the muddy floor dropped down by about a single finger's width. Earned, not given, the system was completely literal. Every single catch deepened the spring. As he stared at the dead shrimp in his hand, a sudden realization hit him. He saw what the 8 billion people bragging in the chat completely missed. Those people got their entire share of luck on day 1, a whole lake to drain. But he had been given a simple hole, one that rewarded him for every single risk. The more he risked, the more it gave back. One path eventually runs dry. But this spring never would, as long as he kept digging deeper into the dark depths. That realization was worth far more than any basic starter pack. Soon, midday passed. The lake market channel flooded with noise as players began dumping fish in massive bulks. Prices for common trout crashed instantly as 10,000 people tried to sell the same thing. He had no actual fish to sell, only ugly material, but that was his hidden edge. No other lake owner even bothered to look at this corner of the market. He managed to sell the skin, the oil sack, and a few scrap shells. A crafter bought them for lamp grease, the payout almost nothing. He immediately traded those coins for a bundle of dry grass and some rough rope. Building materials were his top priority. Walls were far more valuable to him than useless coins. After all, nobody can eat paper money when the freezing night comes crawling in. With his gear prepped, he baited the hook once more and targeted that deep hum. The system interface flashed instantly, revealing the target's true name, the black mud eel. A massive red warning popped up underneath, signaling high danger and even higher rewards. This prize would outclass everything he had. He quickly tied a rope around his waist. He anchored the other end to a heavy, half-buried rock near the puddle's edge. He secured the knot tightly, testing it twice because a giant eel would surely drag him. He had absolutely no intention of being pulled down into that thick, suffocating mud. Suddenly, something slammed the bait hard, bending his cheap rod completely in half. He feared the line would snap, but the thin thread held on by a miracle. A lucky break indeed. He carefully yielded some ground whenever the beast pulled hard. As it tired, he reeled it back in, the waist rope keeping him anchored. A massive creature emerged from the brown water, thrashing and measuring longer than his arm. It was black, slick, and possessed an unnatural strength for its size. The monster coiled itself tightly around his wrist, sinking its teeth deep into his flesh. Searing pain shot straight up to his elbow. He had never faced real combat before. His only prior experience was dodging a random drunk on a train platform once. Wrestling a wild, slippery beast in open mud was clearly a terrible idea. The eel was built for this swamp, so he had to play smarter. His only weapons were the heavy anchor stone and a reed he had sharpened earlier. Breaking free, he pins its head against a sharp rock. Immediately, he throws his entire weight forward. He drives the sharp reed deep behind its skull, leaning hard. The thrashing stops, it shudders once and goes totally still. His hand is bleeding. Through 3 fingers, trembling uncontrollably, he collapses into the cold mud to breathe. Nobody is coming to save him out here. He is completely on his own. Then the loot interface materializes. The rewards drop. He feels each notification land. He gets a good amount of fresh eel meat and a small monster core. Along with that, a fragment of depth stone, some eel oil, and tough hide. The core is the real prize. The moment his fingers tighten around it, the system asks if he wants to feed the source. He accepts. Instantly, the puddle drops. Deeper into the ground, a genuine upgrade. The bottomless black below goes even blacker. He wraps the tough hide around his bleeding, bitten hand, tying it off. With a thin strip of the skin itself, the pressure stops the bleeding completely. He keeps the meat. The oil fish already taught him a lesson about hunger. There is simply no way he will eat his best food raw on night 1. That was the first lesson this grassland taught him, and it was painful. Out here, danger is not something to escape, it is something to gather. Danger is inventory. The shrimp are worthless, but the thing that bit him pays. It paid for a day of food, a deeper source, and a protective wrap. Think about it from now on. Every single cast is a massive, high-stakes gamble. His system radar has been showing a strange object hidden right under the eel. It has hard, square edges. No fish looks like that. He casts straight down. The system names it before it even breaks the water, a guarded blueprint chest. Guarding the lid is a pale, hard-shelled chest crab the size of 2 fists. He has no actual weapon, just a simple reed, some rope, and his wits. Knowing crabs only think with their claws, he targets that specific weakness. Dangling a scrap of eel meat to the side, both claws snap shut. With a swift motion, he flips the crab over and pins it with his reed. The beast goes still. He gets some crab meat and keeps the hard shell. Sensing that shell will be useful later, he reaches into the chest. A rolled-up, faintly glowing blueprint, a small tent, time for the next rule. Out here you only learn what you absolutely need. No shortcuts are allowed. You cannot just build on a whim. The system blocks any manual crafting. Unless he has the blueprint to guide him and the right materials gathered. To construct this small tent, he needs dry grass, fishskin rope, and wooden stakes. Fortunately, he already has the dry grass, rope, and some carved stakes. Dumping all the raw resources straight into the system interface, he patiently waits. The tent slowly takes shape right before his eyes, low, ugly, and his first actual shelter with walls. Meanwhile, the evening sky begins to darken. By the time he ties the final corner down, a bitter chill rises. The welcome message was very clear. The first night would be absolutely merciless. Anyone caught without proper shelter, fire, and clean water will not survive. And trust me, this is definitely not the kind of system that bluffs. A solid roof, 2 bottles of water, and plenty of fresh meat are ready. But without a fire to purify the dirty water, he is only 2/3 ready. He was on his way to surviving his first night, for a man ranked dead last among every human alive. He went further than the chat ever expected, sitting in the mouth of his tent as the light turned orange. He took stock the way he always did when a month ran short, 2 bottles of clean water and a whole brown puddle beside him, muddy water he could not drink, raw eel meat, stale bread. He saved his rod. He trusted nothing else, not a reed, rope, thorn, or shell. It was not much, but he had entered the old world with even thinner margins before and made it to his next paycheck. The only thing that had really changed was that the rent out here was paid in survival. He counted nights. It was his only real skill. Then the scammer found him. The worst people in any new world always move faster than the good ones. He came in friendly through the market channel, the ones to watch out for. A private message, his name spelled right, a little Too much warmth packed in, the scammer saw he was new, claiming he hated to watch a solo owner drown on their first night. He just happened to have a spare blueprint, a rare deepwater lure that would let even a small puddle owner source pull in premium fish. Since he liked him, he would let it go. Cheap all his coins in the eel meat, a total steal. A year ago some version of him might have believed a stranger could be kind, but 3 years of watching fake generosity cured him of that. Generosity with a price tag is not generosity, it is a sale. The harder. Seriously, the harder they try to make you feel special, the tighter you hold your gear. So he asked him to list the blueprint on the open market instead of a private deal, just to keep it clean, but the scammer had an excuse that made no sense. Then he asked for its trade record. Every item in this world carried a history, a chain of where it had been and what it really was. The system would show that chain to any buyer who knew to ask. The scammer had an excuse for that too. Softer this time, but then his voice went hard. When sweet-talking failed, he went loud. He took the entire argument to the regional chat, twisting the story inside out so fast it would have been impressive if it were not aimed at his throat. Now he was the villain, a dead last puddle owner hoarding his catch, while better people struggled, too proud and selfish to share with a region that was somehow in his telling, counting on him. He was good at manipulating people. The chat began to turn. A few voices agreed that the worm farmer should share, asking who rank 8 billion thought he was, but he pulled the trade record himself and posted it right where the noise was loudest. The system does not lie about where a thing comes from. The record showed the rare deepwater lure for exactly what it was, a common starter blueprint he had copied and dressed up. Its real origin was stamped at the bottom of the chain. The forged value sat on a worthless base for anyone to read. He did not add anything to it, no need. He just let the record sit under that speech about generosity, and the same crowd that had been ready to shame him read the proof and turned on the scammer instead, because a crowd will always rather laugh at a caught liar than examine itself. He went quiet, then went offline. A while later, the system noted with no feeling at all that his source had been someone else claimed it while he was busy, leaving him feeling pretty bitter. Exactly, a claimed source on day one meant a person left out on the grass somewhere with absolutely nothing left as a freezing night approached. But that guy had tried to steal his food by convincing the whole region he was the thief. He had spent too many years being the one who paid for other people's stories to lose sleep over a man who picked the wrong target. He spent his first survival day running a con instead of fishing, and the night caught up to him fast. Early, he never saw his name again and did not go looking. He came out of the whole thing much richer than he went in, and not just in coins. Two strangers who had watched the drama unfold sent him messages, not to mock but to trade real offers from people who decided the puddle boy could at least read a contract. One of them was about to matter more than either of them could guess. Her handle on the market channel was plain, no boast anywhere, which was its own kind of signal in a place where everyone inflated their value by the hour. Quan so high she did not open with sympathy but with a direct correction. His bait was wrong, she said, not bad luck, just wrong. He was dropping gray starter paste into a depth spring and wondering why only the cheapest things rose to meet it. She knew bait inside out, what grassworm, shrimp smell, and fish oil did when ground together in the right amounts, what each mix called up out of the water and what it left behind. She was not offering charity. She wanted clean materials in return, and she stayed wary through the entire exchange, careful in a way that told him someone had already tried to cheat her once that day, and she was not allowing a second. He could have haggled, but did not. She was right, and a person who leads with the truth when a lie would have sold better is worth far more than the few coins haggling would save. He sent her shell scraps, a measure of eel oil, and sent fair weight, slightly more than the recipe was strictly worth, because he had a feeling he would want to deal with her again. The cheapest thing a man can buy is someone's willingness to trade with him twice. She sent back the recipe for a paste that smelled horribly of wounded mud shrimp. It was the kind of smell that makes a bigger creature think it found an easy meal. He mixed it, baited his crooked hook, and cast where the forecast showed a hard square edge, sitting just under the water where the eel came from. The bait worked on the first pull exactly as she had said, his line suddenly heavy with intent. Another chest rose out of the dark, this one bound in a knot of crab legs, and his forecast showed a blueprint folded inside. The moment it broke, the Surface, the cold arrived, not the slow evening cold that had been creeping. Up since he built the tent, this was a sudden freezing drop, fast and hard. Warmth was pulled right out of the air, a warning opened across the region. In pale letters that every survivor on every plot read at the same. Second he did, first cold rainstorm incoming, exposed survivors will not. Last the night, he turned the crab-laid chest over in his hands, through the wet shell he could already make out the shape of the word on the blueprint. Folded inside, and of everything the system could have handed him right. Before a freezing storm, it handed him the one thing he needed most, a bonfire. Night falls on this strange new world, casting its dark shadow over 1,000 acres of open grassland. For once he felt ready, despite the terrifying number next to his name. Well, almost ready anyway. He had never been so grateful to hold a blueprint. The chest was still tangled in a knot of twitching crab legs, with a massive crab still attached. This thing was far bigger and angrier than the first chest guard. So he patiently took it down, sticking to the exact same method that worked before. He was not about to abandon a working strategy just to act brave and lose a finger. By throwing a scrap of meat to distract both claws, he kept himself safe. Then a quick flip onto its back with the reed, and it was over. The chest lay open. He grabbed the blueprint, reading the text in the fading daylight to see his prize. The system gave him a bonfire blueprint just moments before the freezing storm rolled in. It required dry grass, stones, fish oil, and a spark stone. Luckily, he had some. Since hour one, he had hoarded grass to brace for this exact freezing weather. Luckily, he already had eel oil, stones, and the starter pack spark stone ready to go. He prepped the wood and built the fire quickly as rain started to spit. Pouring on the eel oil, he made absolutely sure the wet kindling would catch fire. The first wave of heat hit him just as the heavy downpour slammed down. He sat huddled in the mouth of his ugly little tent, letting the fire warm his shivering body. For about 10 seconds, he actually believed he might survive this brutal night. But 10 seconds of hope is all a survivor gets before reality forces them back to work. The freezing rain poured down heavily, exactly as the system had warned him it would. It was cold, relentless, and turned the vast grasslands into a giant swamp of mud. Glancing at the global chat, he saw the storm doing far worse to other players. Especially those foolish people who spent their first day bragging online instead of building shelters. A clean, wide lake looks gorgeous until a freezing storm starts pouring down on it. Talk about an absolute nightmare scenario. No walls, no fire, and the freezing cold hitting from everywhere. Within an hour, the bragging on the global channel fell completely silent. Instead, players realized far too late that water alone is not a shelter. But our main character actually had a house, or at least a decent tent that held. His fire survived too, safely tucked beneath the overhang of the tent fabric. Safely shielded from the deadly downpour that was currently killing other players outside. He turned the rain into the one thing his little mud puddle could never give him. Using the spare tent cloth to catch the runoff, he funneled it into his bottles. Then he poured the excess into a cracked pot he had recently traded for. Free clean water falling straight from the sky was too valuable to waste in the mud. By the time the worst of the night passed, he had amassed an impressive supply. He actually had more clean water than when the day began, without touching the brown pond. Next, he dried the crab shell by the fire until it hardened completely. Rotating it to cure evenly, he settled down to outlast the remaining hours of dark. He barely slept at all, knowing sleep was a total luxury in this deadly new world. The relentless rain kept finding every single gap in his makeshift shelter. Twice the biting wind nearly blew out his fire under the tent cloth overhang. And twice he physically shielded the flame with his body and tent cloth to keep it burning. Letting it die meant starting a desperate fight with freezing, wet hands. Out in the chat channels, he could hear what the brutal night was doing. It worked, the frantic cries over the channels thinned out one by one. A few begged the open channels for help that absolutely nobody out on the grass could give. He stayed completely silent. There was nothing he could send across 1,000. Freezing, rain-soaked acres, if he burned his own energy trying to save people. He could not possibly reach, he would only add his own name to the list of the lost, so he fed his fire and watched the dark water slowly climb the puddle's edge, and he counted his supplies against the brutal trials the morning was bound to bring him. By the time the worst passed, he was still freezing, still exhausted but still alive. Which was 3 things more than those with bigger plots could say. The market showed him what the storm was worth before the rain even cleared. Fire was the ultimate game now. Every channel was absolutely packed to the brim with players who would have laughed at a campfire blueprint yesterday, now offering real fortunes to stay warm. Through a freezing rain without any shelter, fortunately, he held the only survival blueprint. He did not sell many copies of it. He was not about to flood the market, with the only asset keeping him special, especially since he had already watched the price of common fish crash through the floor because 8 billion desperate players all had the exact same thing to sell. He refused to do that to fire. He sold just a few copies. Then he stopped and he sold the rest of it in pieces instead. Fire. Starting packets, a measure of eel oil to ignite soaked grass. Plain advice on keeping a flame alive in a downpour, which they needed far more than any blueprint. He took useful goods, not coins, because in the middle of a brutal storm, a simple cracked pot is worth far more than money you cannot even spend until the storm ended. By the time the sky started to gray, he had turned single fire into a real pile of gear he had not owned the day before. A sack of charcoal, the cracked pot, a leaking bucket he could patch, a bundle of weed fiber shells. Every piece of it was a tool, or the start of one, and all of it bought with a warmth he could easily recreate tomorrow for absolutely nothing. One trade stuck with him, a neighbor 3 plots over, soaked and shivering so hard it came through his broken, half-spelled messages, offering a whole crate of fresh fish for a single fire packet and the survival advice to go with it. Yesterday, that crate would have been a fortune. Tonight, it was completely worthless because everyone had fish, the price had crashed, and they both knew it. Still, he offered it anyway because fish cannot keep a man warm. He did not take the crate. He took his spare bucket and a coil of good rope instead, things he could actually use, and he sent him the packet and told him plainly how to bank the fire so the rain could not reach it. The man survived and thanked him 2 days later. After he had stopped shaking, he did not need the thanks, but he marked him down as someone who had paid fairly and remembered a kindness. And out here, that is worth keeping track of. He was still ranked dead last. The leaderboard had not moved a single spot, but he had started the storm with a tent and an eel and ended it with the foundation of a workshop. Talk about instant karma, because those laughing at the worm farmer were the very same ones who had spent that night losing everything they had bragged about. His puddle had been drinking the storm too, all that rain, all that runoff, all the cores and catches he had fed it the day before, and somewhere in the gray morning, the rising water at his feet crossed the line it had. He had been climbing toward this goal. The water rose, the mud thinned, and the pond floor dropped down as the system wrote a brand new name in pale light. His muddy puddle upgraded. It was still no lake compared to what others bragged about in chat. This small pond was still a joke, just a dark pool hidden behind patchy grass, but it ran deeper than before, and the second the water settled into its new shape, something deep within him settled too. He felt a brand new power. The system called it depth sense. He could feel the water now instead of guessing, while catch forecast only predicted bites beforehand. Depth sense let him reach down to what was already waiting there. He felt the bottom structure, the resting shapes, and the soft spots. The first time he used this power on purpose, he knelt at the edge and pushed his mind into the dark. Suddenly, the pond opened up in his head, completely bypassing his eyes. He could feel the newly dropped floor from the upgrade, the icy pockets of deep water, and the slow shapes resting on the bottom. This was not sight or simple guesswork. This was absolute knowing. It was as certain as knowing the coins in his own pocket. Deep down, underneath everything else, his sense located a fish with a broad, flat shell. Across its back, pinned in the mud beneath it, lay a square blueprint. And here's where it gets interesting. This skill gave him one more massive advantage. It revealed the exact weak point instead of the armored back, a soft, vulnerable soft seam underneath where the shell met the body, the one spot a spear could penetrate. He did not rush. He had a warm fire, shelter, food, and a raging storm handling his fishing pressure for him, so he spent the gray morning making himself much tougher. Before facing an armored beast, the tough crab shell he cured at the fire became arm guards, lashed in place with the weed fiber he traded for. The eel hide became wraps for his hands, doing far more than stopping bleeding. They gave him a tight grip on a wet line and his wet spear. Then he cut a longer, heavier reed than the one he used to kill the eel, shaping it into a heavy spear he could throw his full weight behind. Next, he mixed a batch of paste, using that shrimp scent she had sent him because a shell-backed fish of this size was slow, stubborn, and highly attracted to that smell. The bait successfully lured the monster from the deep. It rose slow, its massive shell. Breaking the surface first, flat and covered in mud, he hooked it on the crooked gacha rod, which was barely strong enough to turn the beast. He avoided a direct struggle, since depth sense had already warned him that fighting the shell was hopeless. His first heavy thrust with the spear simply glanced off the thick armor plates, nearly costing him his spear. The fish slammed sideways with immense power, jerking him off balance into the cold shallows. He caught himself and backed away. Forcing the fight would be like the eel all over again, that same painful mistake, which had cost him 3 fingers. He refused to repeat it. He let the beast roll, tiring itself out on the line while he waited. Even an armored beast has to expose itself to move. When it humped its back to turn, the seam showed exactly where the sense predicted, a vulnerable line under the shell. Where it met the flesh, he drove his sharp spear straight into that soft spot, throwing every single bit of his weight down on it until it finally stopped moving. No physical wrestling, no flashy heroics, just finding the weak spot and having patience. It was turning out to be the only real strength he could rely on out here. Then his loot begins to rise one line at a time, starting with the water filter blueprint. The exact item he had desperately needed all day long, along with heavy, high-grade shell plates. Far better than crab shell, going straight into his stash of armor materials. Next was fine lake sand, and a small, clear pebble labeled as valuable without explanation. Plus 8 lake coins, easily the most money he had held since this nightmare began. He sits back on his heels in the mud, completely soaked, his arms trembling once more. Yet for the second time in 2 days, he had conquered danger and spun it into survival. He was finally beginning to understand the brutal rules of this new world. How a person could actually win without ever being the strongest monster in the water. Before even touching the filter, he deals with the food first. Hunger leads to bad choices. He has a fresh eel's worth of raw meat that will quickly spoil if left untouched. So he builds a low rack of green reeds over the fire to smoke the strips slowly. He turns them in the gray morning, letting the heat do what the cold could not, making the meat last. Soon, a surprisingly decent aroma fills his wet, cold camp. It is the very first good thing this unforgiving grassland has ever offered him. Best of all, it leaves him with something far better than a simple hot meal. He now has preserved, smoked stock in a world where everyone else eats day to day. Most survivors are forced to eat their catch instantly because they cannot store it. He eats 2 strips, packs away the rest, and realizes he just stumbled onto a goldmine. This is his second major trade product. Now, it is time to build the water filter. It requires sand, shells, grass cloth, and charcoal, and he has every single ingredient ready. Thanks to his storm trades, he constructs the filter safely under the dry tent lip. Safe from the rain, he pours murky pond water directly into the crude device. It drains out crystal clear. He cups his hands, takes a long sip, and smiles. After rationing 2 small bottles for days, having unlimited fresh water is pure heaven. It is the absolute best thing he has tasted since his journey began on the train. Suddenly, a massive realization hits him long before the system can even announce it. Everyone is desperately trying to sell fish, 8 billion people with lakes. They are all flooding the market with trout, racing each other to the bottom. When everyone sells the exact same item, its value drops to absolute zero. Yet despite having oceans of it, not a single soul is selling drinking water. It never crossed their minds that clean, safe, filtered water is the ultimate luxury. Especially when a heavy storm turns every open pond into mud and sickness. Fish is just simple food, but clean drinking water is actual life itself. And life, as it turns out, sells for a much higher price than food. No one else built a filter because they never had to worry about running out. But our guy has spent his entire life worrying about running out of resources. This is the one subject where he holds a massive head start over everyone. So he avoids the fish wars completely, opting to sell filtered water in clay pots instead. He even bundles it with strips of smoked eel as a complete survival package. He keeps his prices fair, but never cheap, ensuring he gets maximum value. The real secret to his success lies in what other players see when they scan him. Since every survivor has the ability to look up another player's profile. The appraisal skill lied for him, masking the real depth of his pond and hiding how much he was actually pulling up and how fast. It kept his climb off the public record entirely. To every scan that reached him, he was still rank 8 billion. Still the simple worm farmer, a dead last puddle owner who had gotten lucky with a Fire blueprint and stumbled into a little clean water to sell. Nobody guards what is theirs against the man they are busy laughing at, his first reel. Water sale proved him completely right. A survivor located 2 regions out, a lake owner. Sent for a single measure almost as a joke, half expecting the worm farmers. Water to be the poison Kang Teo kept calling it. He sent it clean. An hour later, the message came back changed, with no joke left, asking how much he had and what he wanted for a standing order because the man's own lake had gone foul in the storm, and every scan ran on it came back worse by the hour. He had what the buyer could not get. From a source 100 times his size, he named a fair, steady price and secured his first regular buyer before the mud on the grass had even dried. After that, buyers came faster than he could have hoped, and he never once had to chase the fish price down into the dirt to find them. It killed the last of the scammer too, without him lifting a single finger. There were still a few voices left in the regional chat clinging to that version of him, calling him a proud puddle boy, hoarding what the region needed. But the moment his filtered water came up, verified clean, and the people who bought it did not get sick, that story had nowhere left to stand. You cannot call a man a fraud while he is the one selling you the water that keeps your own source from poisoning you. The doubt died quietly, and he let it. That is when the man with the biggest lake in the region decided to come down and step on him himself. His name was Kang Teo, and he made very sure everyone knew it. His source was not a lake so much as a small sea. Through the chat, he could see what Kang Teo had already built on it. Docks running out across the water, nets, and a whole crew of other survivors working it. For him, with storage sheds going up along the shore, he controlled the price of common fish for the entire region because he could outsupply anyone alive. And he had noticed the worm farmer making noise in his market, deciding to put a stop to it. Now watch this. He does what massive supply always lets them do. He mocked him first in chat for the crowd, calling his whole territory a stain on the region and his water a sickness waiting to happen, picking the cursed water story back up where the scammer had dropped it, and then he flooded the channel with so much cheap common fish that the price fell straight through the floor, trying to drown his small trade under the sheer weight of his. It did not touch him. Kang Teo could not have known why, because his scan read the same worm farmer everyone else's did, but the reason was simple. He was not selling fish, he was selling fire, clean water, and the dried food that storm-soaked lake owners suddenly could not do without, and you cannot crash the price of a thing by flooding the market with a completely different thing. He worked that out a few hours too late, his crew going quiet in the trade records as the day wore on. He filed his rival's name away beside the eel in the storm, another danger with a cost and a payout attached to it. He did not know the size of it yet, but the rival had built his whole power on being the biggest, and he was not going. He had to take it well. That morning, the market proved there were things he could not outsmart. She asked for it, reading his catches off the market and working out what his pond was growing into faster than he said a word about it. She was the only person in the region looking at the worm farmer's trades and seeing the truth underneath, knowing there was absolutely nothing lucky about any of it. She didn't say so aloud, but she treated him as a partner worth keeping instead of a mark worth a single sale. So he started sending her clean materials and fair weight in return, a simple arrangement that had begun as one cautious trade, settled into something steadier out here that mattered. A man alone on 1,000 acres needs exactly one person he can deal with straight, and she was turning out to be his. The storm broke near the end of the day, the rain thinning to nothing as the gray pulled back off the grass, and he went down for one last cast before the light faded. The forecast showed a weedfish in the new layer, all teeth and temper, and it fought him dirty, biting the line and spinning the hook 3 separate times before he finally landed it. When it came up, it was already dying. As it died, it coughed something up into the mud at the pond's edge, a torn blueprint scrap. Only a piece of a hole. He picked it up and read what he could. Drying rack, just a fragment, a corner of the design, the rest gone, and he felt the rest of it pull at him from somewhere lower, down in the dark, where the water ran deepest. He looked into the pond, down through the clear water. His filter hadn't even touched yet. At the very bottom, where the storm had stirred something loose, there was a ring, a circle of black set into the floor of his own pond, darker than the water around it, with a cold coming out of it that the fire at his back couldn't reach. The weedfish gave one last kick, slid out of his hands, and dove straight down through that black ring, taking the rest of itself into the dark. he sat on the rim of the small mud pond, with a fragment of a blueprint in his hand and a hole in the bottom of his own. Water that hadn't been there an hour before, a drying rack in pieces, and the rest of it down a black ring breathing cold into a pond he had only just learned to read. The system had spent 2 days teaching him the same lesson over and over through the eel, the shell-backed fish, and the storm. Everything worth having down here was guarded, and everything guarded paid out. For the man patient enough to find the soft place and wait, he had a fire now. Clean water, smoked food, a rival who had already underestimated him once, and a torn blueprint pulling him toward a hole in the dark. The puddle wasn't finished opening, it had only just started, and in the morning he was going down to see how far. He went down for the weedfish first thing in the morning, because a hole in the bottom of his pond would still be there at noon, and a torn blueprint wouldn't finish itself. He had slept maybe 3 hours with the black ring at the bottom of his pond pulling at the back of his mind the whole time, and he woke before the light was full and went straight to the water. The grassland was quiet again, the storm 2 days gone, the mud drying to cracked gray across the open plots. His camp had held through all of it. Now let's see what else is waiting. What the hole in his own floor was hiding, the weedfish in the new layer. They were fast and mean, biting just for the joy of it. The first one took his bait and spat the hook before he could set it. The second shook loose halfway up and dove, but the third he hooked clean through the side of the jaw, and he did not give it a single inch of slack the entire way up. When it landed, it brought the rest of what he needed with it, the torn drying rack fragment in his pack, pulled toward the new piece the moment they came close, and the two halves of the blueprint became one whole drying rack reed frame fishkin cord charcoal bed. He had been smoking eel on a sad little rack of green reed since the storm, and it had worked, but the real thing was a different animal. He built it. Tall 3 levels of frame, lashed with fishkin cord over a bed of charcoal he had traded for. Once it was up, he went to work on everything he had been saving, the rest of the eel, the crab meat, and the shell-backed fish, which was a lot of meat once you got past the armor. He cut it into strips and laid it across the frame, smoking it low and slow through the morning, turning it and feeding the charcoal. By the time the sun was high, he had something almost nobody else in the region had: food that kept. That is a simple sentence that means nothing until you understand what everyone else was doing. 8 billion people pulling fish out of the water and eating it the same day because a fish left out goes bad, and a lake gives you no way to hold what it gives you. They were rich in the moment and poor by morning every single day, starting over with every single sunrise. But he had a wall of smoked, dried meat stacked and counted that would feed him for days without casting a line. In a survival migration, he would stay strong as long as he ate, while the hungry ones around him made the fatal mistakes. He had just bought himself a long stretch of never being the hungry one. He counted his stockpile in days, because days are the only unit that had ever made sense to him. So many strips of eel, so many of crab, so many of the shell-backed fish, and against them, so many days he could go without touching the water. If a storm came, a fight broke out, or a stretch where the pond needed to rest and deepen instead of being fished, that number, days of food in hand, was the first real cushion he had owned since the train. With a cushion behind him, he could make different choices than he had ever made. When he was one bad day from nothing, he had spent his whole old life scraping by with absolutely nothing in reserve. Out here, he was quietly building the reserve first. So she reached him through the market while the smoke was still going, and she had a recipe she thought he would want: grasshopper bait, dry land bait. She called it ground grasshopper in grass oil, not for the shallow, ugly things he had been pulling, but for the faster, smarter fish that lived in deeper, cleaner water. She had worked out what his pond was becoming before he told her thing about it. Just from reading his trades, she was right again. She kept being right about water she had never seen. She wanted clean water for the recipe, a standing measure, and she wanted something he had not expected: shelter. Her own plot caught the rain badly. She said plainly, no shame in it, and the cold storms were costing her. She wanted to know how he had kept a fire alive through the worst night the grassland had thrown so far, and she wanted the design of a tent that would not drown. He sent her the water, and he sent her far more than the recipe was worth, having decided 2 days ago that she was the only person out here he would deal with honestly. Then he sent her the rest for free: how to shield a fire under an overhang so rain could not reach it, how to string cloth to catch runoff instead of flooding The camp, the actual tent design, the exact shelter that kept him alive. She had been honest since day one, even when a lie would have profited her. A reliable person like that does not get charged for shelter. He tested the grasshopper bait that very hour, driven by curiosity rather than necessity, casting it into the clean surface water where faster fish started to appear. Since the upgrade, it immediately pulled up a striking, long silver fish. He had never seen this before, quick, clean, and worth real coin. This was nothing like the ugly, mud-bound creatures the starter pond brought. She was right about that too. Every recipe she sent reached deeper or ran cleaner than the last. She was guiding his pond progress remotely from a plot she had never set foot on. The longer they traded, the more he realized bait was no minor skill. In this water-dominated world, knowing exactly what to drop in was worth more than owning lakes. She went silent for a while after that, and when she returned, her thanks were brief, but beneath those words lay a steady, growing trust. Trust in this harsh wilderness is not built on empty promises. It comes from fair trades, followed by a moment of unprompted, free help. That is how bonds are made. There were 3 transactions in now. Not a single one had gone sour. That counted for everything. In a place where most voices in chat were working an angle. With his food secured and grasshopper bait ready, he finally made his move. The mysterious black ring had been waiting. He had saved his lake coins, hoarding every single one because he felt the pond was close to evolving. He wanted to force the upgrade on his terms rather than wait around. The system had taught him how this worked. You could let it climb slowly on its own, or you could force a sudden upgrade. Now watch, he decided to feed it coins and materials all at once. He ground the dark death stone fragments into powder, gathered the shells, measured out the fish oil and coins, and poured them into the pond. The water responded instantly, swirling down and purging the last of the mud. It thinned out until he could see straight to the very bottom. Pale light flashed as the system registered the official upgrade to clear pond. For the first time, he could kneel and look all the way down. It was pristine, cold, and deep. The sour brown puddle was gone. It might not look like much to anyone scanning from far away. And the global leaderboard still ranked him dead last, but he knew. This was no small pond. It was a massive deep abyss hiding secrets beneath the surface, just waiting for him to earn them. Even the black ring at the very bottom had changed with this upgrade. Before, it was just a drop into nothingness, a pitch-black pit. No smart man would ever enter without knowing what lay on the other side. Floor, now it is set, steadied, opened into a system-approved stairway. A pathway of pure darkness going down, but more importantly, a way back out. Level 1 puddle dungeon unlocked, but the warning beneath is clear. The abyss can trap survivors forever if their lifeline snaps or their light fails. People have already died down there, chat says, gone and never returning. He will not join them. Still, he is absolutely not leaving a stock dungeon under his pond unopened. Not when the rewards in this world are always worth the patience. Everything built here rewards patience if he is careful enough, so he prepares. First, he secures his waist to the giant buried rock at the rim. This is the same solid anchor that held the eel. He lets the line out slow. Lowering himself into the dark, he brings a sealed flame and fresh lamp oil. This place has absolutely no light. If his flame dies, survival is completely impossible. Arm guards are tightly secured, and his sturdy reed spear rests across his back, along with grasshopper bait and the crooked rod, which needs upgrading. He cannot wait to replace it. Step by careful step, he counts the line. He tracks every single arm length to make sure he can reach the sun again. The drop is deeper than expected. The light from his pond shrinks. It becomes a tiny, pale coin above him as the heavy water changes. It shifts from clean and cold to something ancient, pressing in from all sides. The dark tastes of mud and stone. Halfway down, he pauses. Stop, breathe, check the rope. The real killer down here is panic. Moving too fast, burning through oil, and losing count will destroy him. One slip of focus, and the path to the sun completely vanishes. So he moves slowly, double-checking the rope and counting every single arm length. His feet finally touch solid ground. He stands perfectly still in the blackness. Keeping a tight grip on his lifeline, he confirms his escape route before advancing. Survival comes first. Now he looks at the first layer of the dungeon. It is a drowned room constructed of dark earth and thick, ancient roots. These bizarre roots run deep through the walls, glowing with a faint, cold light. It is a pale, creepy glow, but his eyes quickly adjust to it. Glow-in-the-dark roots, weird. The water down here is also absolutely freezing. And it is not empty. Pale, blind fish emerge from the shadows. They hunt purely by detecting water vibrations, individually weak but vastly numerous. If he thrashes around blindly, he will miss the threats that actually matter. So he backs up to a wall, keeping his movements incredibly small. He lets his shell guards absorb impacts while working his way deeper. They cannot see him. Moving slow and steady, he gives them nothing. It is slow, grueling, ugly work, but honestly, this is exactly what he excels at. No chat to impress, no audience to perform for, and absolutely nobody watching. Just the freezing cold, the glowing roots, and his own slow, careful progress. He picks his way through the dark toward whatever lies ahead. He has no fear of being last. Down here, competition disappears. There is only what he can salvage and carry back to safety. Suddenly he encounters the mud traps. They give absolutely no warning. Ground that looks solid can instantly turn into a deep, sucking nightmare. Deep pits waited below, ready to swallow his leg to the hip while blind fish swam in. They wanted to see what was thrashing. Luckily, his depth sense skill truly proved its worth. He felt the soft floor before stepping on it, a strange, absolute certainty guiding him forward. It was the same instinct that revealed the weak spot on the shell-backed fish as he moved. He navigated the firm ground between dangerous pits, his extra sense reaching out with every step. Then came the chest shrimp. He felt them, long before they actually appeared. A cluster of tiny, fast shapes scurried by, carrying cargo far heavier than themselves. When his light finally hit them, he realized what they were: hand-sized shrimp. Each one was clutching a small lock, scuttling along the base of the distant wall. They headed toward a tiny crack to escape. Suddenly, the system flared. It marked one. It highlighted the leader, the specific one carrying the absolute heaviest load of them all. These are chest shrimp loot carriers. They do not fight, they just run. If they reach that crevice, they vanish with the treasure forever, leaving you empty-handed. He had no time to plan, after 2 days of learning patience. The dungeon was about to teach him that patience has an opposite, and he needed both. The target shrimp bolted for the crack the very second his light touched it. It was fast, way faster than his heavy spear could ever hope to strike. The only tool fast enough to catch, it was the exact one he cursed for 2 days. He cast the crooked rod, throwing the hook right in front of the escaping target. The creature scuttled straight onto the barb, that bent hook which failed him constantly. On 100 easy fish, snagged the panicking shrimp at the perfect angle. He reeled the creature in before it even realized it was caught. It came up still clutching its prize, so he claimed them both on the spot. Past those shrimp, right where the roots grew thickest, stood a solid, real door. It was banded wood with a lock and a square frame built around it. It sat deep under his pond in a world only 20-some days old. Touching it, he felt how solid it was, and the radiating cold was not from water. Roots had tangled all over, holding it shut. The central lock required a specific key. He did not have it, but remember that item, the chest shrimp's prize. The prize still clutched tightly in its tiny claws when he reeled it in. It was a fragment of the key. The system identified it as a root door key fragment. He did not open the door yet. His line was fully extended, and his light faded. Only a fool wastes precious oil on a locked door at the bottom of a dungeon. He knew it was better to climb back to the sun and return fully prepared. So he cleared the remaining loot from the first layer and began his climb. He reeled in his safety line slowly until the cold root light finally faded away. The warm glow of his own pond appeared, and he dragged himself onto the rim. Finally, he breathed open air. Once topside, the dungeon paid out some incredible rewards. He unlocked a basic fishing rod blueprint and a handy mud brick recipe. He received 12 lake coins, the most money he had held since this world began. He also got a whole death stone, plus the key fragment resting in his inventory. He crafted the basic rod immediately. Throwing his old crooked gacha rod away felt amazing. Getting rid of that trash starter rod was one of his favorite moments so far. For 2 long days, that bent, twisted, miserable tool had almost ruined his efforts. It barely caught anything, only redeeming itself by sheer accident right at the very end. On a fleeing shrimp, that basic rod was absolutely nothing special by normal standards. But to him it felt like a legendary weapon, a straight hook that set when he commanded it to, a line so durable it would not snap under pressure. He cast it once. Into the clear pond, it worked beautifully, 2 whole days. Of endless frustration washed away with that single cast. The mud brick recipe was his other quiet victory. He had been constantly patching a flimsy fence of soft mud posts that washed away every time it rained, but baked bonfire bricks made a wall that actually lasted. He started baking them that very afternoon, stack after stack, because he had a strong feeling that a day was coming, a day when a hard wall was everything. Would mean losing his pond forever. By dusk, he had it. Fired bricks laid along the weakest stretch, hard, solid. Solid where the mushy mud once sat. Stepping back to inspect his progress, he could finally see the true shape of his build, no longer just a campsite. A real stronghold, walls, fire, fresh water, stored food, a reliable rod. Dungeon right underneath. It was a slow payoff for patience. None of it would have impressed someone sitting on a massive lake, but together, his setup was worth far more. Only he could see the true potential of this land, guided by his own sight. His appraisal skill made absolutely sure of that. He almost missed the next development. But counting was the single skill he had mastered. He started tracking trades. Dried food was selling incredibly well, the watcher even better, and their combined bundles best of all. As he processed the daily trades, he spotted a distinct pattern among the buyers, the same small handful of brand new, completely blank accounts. They bought steady amounts, no haggling, no chatting, just taking the food and clean water and slipping away. Fake names. Anyone out here can register one. But those fake identities could not hide a pattern from a guy who analyzed patterns for a living. They all bought the exact same way, moved the exact same way, and when he traced their purchases through the trade logs, they all pointed to one single place. Tio's Lake. That same man had stood arrogant in the regional chat, calling his water a complete sickness and his hard-won territory a stain, yet his own crew was buying that dried food and filtered water under fake names, because a crew simply cannot survive on raw fish and dirty lake water alone. He desperately needed what he was selling. He had to send his people to buy it in absolute secret, while spitting on it publicly, but he kept completely quiet. Leverage was better than cheap chat drama. He just kept on selling, kept counting, and held onto this discovery. He filed away the most valuable fact he had learned about Kang Tio. Tio, yet the undisputed powerhouse of the region, could not even feed his own people without his help. This pointed directly to how the upcoming battle would play out. Tio's entire leverage was that massive lake, its sheer scale, and the endless fish he could harvest, but a lake is ultimately just fish and loud noise, nothing more. And his crew had just proven that by secretly paying a total stranger for the two crucial things their lake could never provide: clean water and preserved food. He was massive. But he was deeply unstable, and as we know, unstable giants always fall the hardest. He did not know how he would exploit this weakness yet. He only knew it was real and that his rival had zero clue. That night, he fit the key fragment to the door. He had not planned to do it in the dark, but it kept pulling at him. There was a cold, steady tug pulling him toward the deep dungeon below. The quiet camp lay dark, the fire burning low. He simply could not sleep with his mind racing about it. Door hidden at the bottom of this new world, so he roped up and headed back down with a full flask of oil and the new rod strapped to his back. The fragment was not a complete key. But the ancient door did not need a complete key. It just needed enough, and that fragment was plenty. He slid it into the lock, and the thick roots holding the entrance shut. For ages slowly peeled back. The massive door swung inward, releasing a wave of thick, freezing air. Bitter, stale cold washed right over him. The room on the other side was filled with fishing rods, shattered shafts, bent metal hooks, and completely rotted lines. Dozens of them lay piled and scattered across the floor of a chamber that should not even exist. The moment his light swept over them, he realized something was terribly wrong. His gut knew it before his mind did. These rods were ancient. Weathered, worn, and rotted soft. This was the kind of decay that took years. But years did not exist here. The migration only started 3 weeks ago, nothing down. Here should be older than he was, yet these items were broken and abandoned. Long before the system ever snatched him off that train, kneeling down, he picked one up. The fragile shaft crumbled the moment his fingers closed around the grip. The line turned to powder, and the metal hook was eaten through with rust. It was once a great rod, far better than his basic one, or anything he had seen traded in the entire region. Someone had owned, used, and broken it in a deep place that the system claimed was only 3 weeks old. Gently, he set it back down. With the quiet care one reserves for the dead, a freezing realization finally settled in. Think about that. This world was not new. only brand new to them. Someone had lived and fished here before. The deep water he was exploring was no empty wilderness. This was a structured, built place with real history, filled with rooms, doors, and the relics of its creators, now buried deep under the soil, just waiting for 8 billion players to dig it all up, one hook at a time. Suddenly, the system projected a cold, emotionless notification directly over the dark pile. Warning: Rod Eater detected. Instantly, something massive shifted in the black water at the far end of the room. Slow, heavy, patient, he felt its cold gaze turned directly toward his light, focusing on the new rod strapped to his back. He froze in the doorway, a whole room of dead men's gear separating them. He stood perfectly still as something dangerous began to stir in the shadows, and he understood that this water was no longer just his. It had a dark history. That history was still alive down here, and it had definitely heard him enter. Slowly, he backed out of the doorway, refusing to look away until the heavy root door was safely shut. A smarter version of the tragic survivors who died early would have made the exact same choice and retreated immediately. The creature hiding in the dark was a rod eater, and he possessed exactly one rod worth mentioning, the basic tool he had crafted and cast just once into the clear water, a tool he cherished more than he probably should have. Entering a dark room with a monster that literally eats fishing rods while carrying his only weapon was not bravery. That was how players became forgotten names in the chat, who are never heard from again, so he climbed back up to the surface, banked the fire, slept as much as possible, and prepared to handle this the right way. A rod eater eats rods, that was the whole problem. Once he realized that, things clicked. The solution was actually simple. If the beast wanted to bite metal, he would feed it metal. But he would not sacrifice his main rod. Instead, he spent the morning building a decoy. He lashed a fake rod together from a stripped reed and the ruined hook. He smeared metal-smelling paste onto the old gatacha hook using shell powder and spoiled oil. He kept backup hooks ready just in case. Shell guards were strapped tight up both of his arms. Then came his masterpiece. It was a clever trap no one else around here could have built. He carried down pieces of a fired mud brick wedge to assemble at the narrow opening. He built it as a choke point right at the entrance of the narrow rod room. A solid corner where he could drive the beast so it could not turn. Make no mistakes, he was not calm. A metal-eating nightmare had been waiting in the dark. It had lurked behind a door under his pond, since long before his familiar world ended. Now he was stepping right into its lair on purpose, but fear is just data. And that data was highly useful. It told him to prepare a decoy and stay smart. It told him to build the brick wedge and keep his actual rod safe on his back. He kept it out of reach until the last second. Going in completely fearless would be pure stupidity. It would mean he did not grasp the danger. He understood the danger perfectly well. But he refused to let terror dictate his moves. He finally stepped inside, holding the fake rod. With his real rod slung securely across his back, he let the monster smell the bait. The rod eater rose from the pitch-black water. For its massive size, it moved unbelievably fast. It was nothing but jaws and ancient, raw hunger. It lunged and took the decoy bait. Just as he had hoped, its massive mouth clamped down on the fake rod and crushed it. Reed and old metal crumpled instantly against teeth that would have snapped his real rod in seconds. In that brief moment, the beast was distracted, eating a meal that was not his livelihood. He drove it toward the brick wedge. The creature thrashed wildly, trying to turn. But the solid corner blocked its path. He slammed the reed spear deep under its soft jaw. He leaned all his weight into it. The beast bit down hard, nearly splintering the wood. The struggle boiled down to a simple test of survival. Would the wedge hold or his arms break? The monster shoved back. He had never felt a raw, crushing pressure quite like this. A slow, grinding mass was trying to back off the bricks, pivot, and face him head-on. All that stood in its way was a corner of fired mud and a frail human. His boots slipped and slid in the wet muck. The bricks began to groan under the stress. He wedged his shoulder hard behind the spear, pressing his heels against a solid patch of stone. He stopped thinking about victory. He focused solely on not letting go of that spear. Letting go meant the beast would turn, and if it turned, he was a dead man. But the crude wedge held, his arms hanging on by a thread. This was the eel and the shell-backed fish all over again, the same brutal struggle. And every single fight out here in the wild was teaching him the exact same lesson. He was never going to be the absolute strongest creature in these waters, not even close. His only path to victory was making the water small, taking away the giant's room to move. To survive, he had to trap the stronger beast in his own corner. He pinned the rod eater flat against the bricks until it finally stopped fighting the spear. He held it there even longer, just to be absolutely sure the threat was truly over. When it finally went limp, he collapsed in the freezing dark against his saving mud wedge. His hands shook uncontrollably as the dark, quiet room settled into a heavy, silent peace. Now nothing remains except his own breathing and the drip of cold water off the walls. In the dim root light, he spots the old broken rods scattered around once more. They were here long before them, littered around the carcass of the beast that guarded them. He lacks answers. Still, his gut says this creature served a deeper purpose. The rod eater was not placed here to guard nothing, and this pile of gear is proof. Somewhere beneath all of this lies a dark truth he is not going to like. Fortunately, the rod eater drops loot, unlike any monster he has killed before. Its teeth are massive, curved, and harder than any stone he has ever carved. These will make perfect spear tips, vastly superior to the flimsy reeds he relied on. Next is a bundle of what the system calls reinforced line weed. This tough fiber can be spun into fishing line that won't snap under heavy pressure. He also gets a massive monster fish core, warm and heavy in his hand. Even better are 3 glowing scrolls that matter far more than meat or metal. He finds blueprints for a pond fence, grip gloves, and rod repair oil. Back under the sun, he crafts all 3 immediately, without wasting a single second. He refuses to let valuable blueprints sit idle in his pack while resting. The rod repair oil comes first, requiring rendered eel fat and crushed seashells. He works the mixture together and rubs it over his damaged basic fishing rod. The deep scratches left by the rod eater miraculously close up and heal. The weapon is restored to perfect condition, offering him a new sense of security. Now he has a reliable tool he can maintain, even after the toughest battles. As long as he has eel fat and shell, he can keep it pristine. Next are the grip gloves, crafted from tough fish skin and reinforced with shell. They allow him to grip wet fishing lines and weapons without ever slipping. After days of losing his grip constantly, they feel like an absolute lifesaver. Finally, he constructs the pond fence using the clay bricks he previously prepared. It forms a solid barrier around his clean water source, built to last. He even embeds the sharp rod eater teeth along the top as spikes. Looking over his camp that night, he marvels at how much has changed. Just 6 days ago, he had nothing but a bent hook and mud. Now he has reliable gear, a fortified wall, a dungeon, and surplus food. In fact, his pantry is full enough to survive a whole week. None of this came from sheer luck. Every single upgrade was bought with blood. He simply faced one deadly threat after another, refused to die, and adapted. By using their drops to craft his next tool, he secured survival. It is a simple, brutal survival strategy, but it is working perfectly for him. Looking at his newly finished fence, his campsite finally feels like a real home. Now watch, because he has no idea how quickly this wall will be tested. On the very first night after construction, the harsh wilderness comes knocking on his door. This happens because his water source is simply too clean and pure now. Having the only cold, fresh pond in a drying grassland is a curse. It does not just attract traders looking to buy water on the market. It draws every thirsty monster for miles, lurking in the shadows of night. Past midnight, low, fast-moving beasts emerge from the tall, dry grass in packs. Lured by the scent of fresh water, they charge forward, only to hit a wall. With only one man between them and the water, that fence earned its keep in the first 10 minutes. Those beasts were strong, stronger than him one-on-one, claws, weight, hunger. That did not care what he wanted, but his wall took their savage charge, and those rod eater. Teeth along the top turned them, funneling them straight toward the single gap he had left open, that narrow bottleneck where he stood waiting with his spear. Walls do the same. Thing for a weak man that a dungeon corner does. It takes away running room. It forces the fight to happen exactly where he chooses, just one beast at a time in a gap barely wide enough for one, instead of the whole pack swarming him out in the open. Their numbers and strength would have ended him in a breath. He held the gap. His grip gloves kept the spear steady, even when the blood made everything slick. The shellguard's deflected claws he could not dodge, and the rod-ear teeth on his spear tore through tough hide his old reed points would have skidded off. They kept coming in waves, brief lulls followed by another mad rush, the smell of water pulling fresh monsters out of the dark long after the first pack should have given up. He Lost count of how many times he set his feet in that gap, arms went past. Tired into a rhythmic motion, moving entirely on their own, twice a beast gotta. Heavy paw over the wall, forcing him to leave his post to kill it before it dropped. Inside the camp, both times, he lunged back to the bottleneck a mere half-second before the next. Beast came through. That half-second was the only margin between holding his precious. Pawned and losing everything. Let's be real, there was absolutely nothing clean about this. It was a long, ugly, exhausting night, leaving him with deep cuts he would feel for days, but the fire at his back kept him from being blinded by the dark, and the fence kept the numbers off. The long, ugly habit he had built over those 4 days of staying calm, picking the single threat directly in front of him and dealing with it before looking at the next, kept him alive when raw strength alone never could have. By the cold gray of morning, the beast still left standing had given up on his water, retreating to find an easier throat to slash, and those that did not retreat were never going to leave this place again. They paid dearly for that night too, clawbones hard and useful, a pile of tough beast hide better than anything he had worked with. He cured the hide at the fire, stitching it into a protective vest, layering fish skin and beast hide over his chest. He set the heavier shell plates directly into the forearms. When he finally put it on, he was wearing actual, reliable armor for the first time since this world began, and somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, the system adjusted a number it had never moved for him before. His survival rank was climbing, not his source rank, that one. The appraisal still held at dead last, still feeding that pathetic worm farmer story too. Every single scan that reached him, keeping him underestimated, but survival rank was a completely different measure, the system's calculation of how likely a given survivor was to still be breathing in a week. His own rank had spent this whole migration scraping the very bottom along with his muddy water, but now it climbed, and it climbed hard because he had shattered every single line the system had drawn on day one: secure shelter, fire, clean water, stored rations, a fully working rod, and now a wall that had just turned back an onslaught that would have slaughtered most wealthy lake owners out in the open. He was no longer just surviving, he was dug in, and then Kang Teo noticed him, the small target the tycoon had not been able to simply crush, and sooner or later, that was always going to catch his eye. The man's first move was almost polite. A formal offer came through the market. The system backed the deal with real coin, more cash than a simple puddle owner ranked dead last had any right to see. Kang Teo wanted to buy the young man's water source. He spun it as a favor, a clean escape for a guy clearly drowning in over his head. A fair price for a stain on the land. Teo would be happy to take off his hands, but he rejected the offer without saying a single word. Since nobody puts down real coin for something they honestly believe is completely worthless, the massive pile of cash revealed far more about what his puddle was actually worth than any system scan ever could. Teo knew, maybe not everything, but he knew enough to crave it, and anything a snake like Teo wants that badly is something he is going to grip with both hands. Predictably, Teo hated being turned down. When his thug bind failed, Teo resorted to the only other tool he had left, his massive mouth and the gullible crowd that actually listened to him. The cursed Watcher rumors returned, louder and meaner. This time completely organized. His crew blasted the lie across the network channels on cue. The puddle water was pure poison. The worm farmer was selling sickness to desperate folks. Buy from him and your own wells would rot. It was a brilliant lie, the kind that costs absolutely nothing to spread, but takes absolute miracles to disprove. In a dying grassland, where everyone lived in constant fear for their survival, this rumor could have crushed his entire trade. But watch what he did next. He spent every single saved coin on that ends a nasty lie forever, a verification token, direct from the system. It self-analyzed his water in plain view for everyone to read, then stamped liquid clean, no longer just a worm farmer arguing with Teo, the system's word. No rumor could ever shout down. Instantly, he was selling clean water and verified dried rations next, along with the special rod repair oil that every single struggling survivor urgently realized they needed to survive, all of it certified by the only authority in this dark world that never lies. The toxic rumor backfired completely. It made every single person who repeated it look like a complete idiot. It crowned him the sole honest merchant in a marketplace drowned in lies, and Teo had funded that entire disaster himself. You have to love this moment, watching that hard truth hit Teo right in his smug face. Teo's entire influence relied on the mob, the sheer noise he could rally behind a Malicious story, and he had just proven to everyone that the system's stamp beats the biggest voice online. He could easily outshout the kid, but he could never out-truth him because the actual truth was on his side with a system stamp on it, a few. The desperate survivors Tio's thugs had forced to spread the dirty lies quietly began. Purchasing his verified water for themselves, he sold it to them for the exact same fair price. As everyone else, he was not in the business of punishing desperate souls for being terrified. He was in the business of being the reliable one they ran to once the panic faded. 2 mornings later, a woman emerged from the tall grass, the first living soul he had stood face to face with since the train. His system had already alerted him of a survivor crossing the boundary of his territory. He already gripped his heavy spear tightly, waiting at the perimeter fence before he even saw her, a random stranger marching onto a massive 1,000-acre plot. In this harsh, unforgiving wasteland is rarely ever good news, but she was not a raider, nor Tio's thugs returning to steal what Bay failed to take. She was just a single woman, limping heavily and favoring her left side as she drifted closer. To read her status, she was badly hurt. A deep, jagged slash ran along her ribs, clearly carved into her flesh on purpose. She collapsed right at the edge of his fence. She didn't ask for a single thing. She just stared at the wall, the fire, and the clear water behind it. Her eyes scanned the dried food on the rack with a flat, assessing look, like someone who measured water sources for a living. Honestly, it's a strange thing standing in front of a real human after weeks of hearing only voices on a screen. He had traded with hundreds of survivors, but never actually spoken to any of them. Never seeing a real face, a body, or the physical weight of someone standing in front of him. For a second, he didn't know how to react. Then she swayed on her feet, barely catching herself on a fence post. The awkwardness vanished. Because a collapsing person is a basic problem with an obvious answer, and he is pretty good at obvious answers. Her name was Ula, and she came from Tio's Lake. He could have treated her the way the market taught him to treat everything, as goods, bargaining chips, a wounded scout from his rival's operation, who was worth questioning thoroughly and helping as little as possible. Most men out here would have done exactly that. Instead, he gave her clean water, some dried eel, and a warm spot by the fire to rest before she collapsed. He didn't ask her for a single thing until she had finished eating, drinking, and stopped looking like she might die on his grass, not because he is soft-hearted, but because a person isn't a fish. The difference between him and Tio had to count. He decided early. He was not going to be that guy, treating survivors like inventory. She watched him choose. She didn't miss a thing. She didn't miss that at all. She gave him her name, watching his face closely as she said it, guarding herself. She kept her distance, even sitting by his fire. Back to the fence, keeping her good side facing him. It was the cautious, watchful silence of someone who recently learned, at the cost of a painful wound, that trusting the wrong person is incredibly dangerous. He didn't push. He knew the feeling. You don't earn a cautious person's trust by demanding it. He knew that well. You earn it by consistently proving you're exactly as safe as you seemed in the very first minute, until they stop waiting for the catch. So he let her watch. He quietly tended the fire, checked his defensive lines, and let her see that the man behind this wall was just a regular guy. Slowly, the worst of the tension drained from her shoulders. When she was ready, she paid him back with the only thing she had, something worth more than any gear: pure information. She had read water for Tio, scouting sources, and mapping the region's wells until she saw exactly what he planned to do with that map and refused to help, and refusing had earned her that deep wound along her ribs. The grassland was drying up. Long, dry wind was coming. The system had actually been warning of it under everyone's radar, and the smaller sources would start failing first. Tio fully meant to exploit that. He wasn't going to wait for the weak pawns to die. He was going to drain them completely, seizing their water and cores for his own lake, while honestly, it is a completely heartless plan, striking while they are too desperate. And their fear and their water right out from under them, one dying source at a time. He started with the smallest targets, slowly building up, and a clean, deep pond that Tio had already tried and failed to buy was exactly the kind of source a tyrant like that puts at the very top of his list. She wasn't done. After sharing the absolute worst of it, she stood up, ignoring warnings to rest, moving to the edge of his fence and looking at the clear pond. Something in her face shifted. Her talent was not fishing. It was the water itself, how it moved, where it came from, and where it went. His depth sense told him what lived in his water. her sense told her what the water was doing. His own pond was telling her something it had never thought to tell him because he had only looked at what was in the water while she watched. The water itself. Kneeling, she placed her hand near the surface and went completely still, tracking a current he could not feel, following it down toward one side to a spot along the buried edge of the pond where the water moved when it had no natural reason. She told him to dig, and he did, one hand's depth down. In the cold mud, his fingers closed on something that was not stone and was not root. It was a pipe, clay-fired and fitted, a length of crafted pipe buried in the floor of his own pond, feeding water in from somewhere deeper and further down, pointing the way toward whatever the next upgrade would open, a thing the system had already shown him the shape of and called a deep fishing hole. Water does not flow through clay pipe by accident. Pipe is laid, pipe is built by hands with intention to move water from a place it is to a place someone wants. And here it was under his puddle, the same impossible age as the broken rods. Behind the root door, one more piece of proof of the thing he had been refusing to say plainly since the rod room. Siola crouched beside him and looked at the pipe for a long time without saying anything. When she finally spoke, it was quiet and not really to him. She said she had read 100 sources for Tio and felt this same wrong current under a few of the deepest ones and never understood it. Being told to simply stop asking, she had thought it was a flaw in her own sense. It was not. It was this buried pipe in the deep sources all through the region. And a man with the biggest lake who had felt it too and decided the answer was to drain everyone else's before they worked out what they were sitting on. Somebody built this place, the water, the depth, the wells, the whole region was drinking from. None of it was wild. All of it was made and drowned and buried under the grass, and the system had dropped 8 billion of them on top of it, with hooks in their hands, and he was beginning to think the fishing was the whole point. He sat back on his heels with wet clay on his hands and a buried pipe under his pond with Ula watching him understand it. He knew that the next thing down there, whatever the deep fishing hole turned out to be, was not going to be a fish. The dry wind came early, and it came for everyone at once. And the chat that had spent weeks bragging about lakes went quiet in a new and worse way. Siola had warned him it was coming. She had not been able to tell him it would come this fast. The system put the notice up across every channel 2 mornings after she dug the pipe out of his pond floor, a long, hot wind out of nowhere with no rain behind it, and within a day he could feel it pulling the moisture out of the air, the ground, and the open water out on the plots. The weak sources started to shrink. Shallow ponds dropped a hand's width, then another. The chat filled up with people watching their water go down and understanding, slow and sick, that a source can die and that losing their source in a world built on water leaves them with nothing at all. He had been the man with the worst water from the first day, so he had spent the whole migration. He was getting used to having nothing, that dry wind which meant certain death. To the careless was just another lean month for him. Honestly, he would be lying if he said watching it was easy. Over the next few days, the channel chat shifted from bragging to bargaining and finally to begging. Lake owners who once mocked his small puddle were now offering absolutely anything to hold on to water, then offering whatever they had for water itself. Soon they went completely silent. The most terrifying sound in the channel, a source dying, took the owner's whole world down with it. He had nearly died of the same thing, surviving by inches for 3 weeks, and he knew that desperate fear from the inside. Yet knowing that fear gave him no extra water to spare, the kindest thing he could do for them was simply survive, selling what little he could spare at a fair price, not pretending he could save this region 1 bottle at a time. So he worked. He squeezed out beetle sacks before the morning sun rose high and the beetles burrowed. He fired bricks in the cool morning air, checking his own water levels twice a day against a mark scratched on the rim, watching his water line hold while the rest of the region dried up. Each holding day was a day bought with depth nobody else was willing to dig for. His very first move was the one thing almost nobody else even considered. He stopped selling so much water. His filtered water had been his best trade for 2 weeks, feeding him steady coins while the fish market drowned, but he cut it back hard to a mere trickle because a pond losing water to scorching winds cannot also lose precious supply to a buyer. The coins hurt to give up, but going thirsty later would hurt far more. A source sold dry during a drought is a source completely lost when things get even worse, and he had not escaped the very bottom rank just to trade away his lifelines for a handful of useless coins he could not drink. Next, he chased down every drop he could add. Instead of spend, water beetles were crawling in the dry grass near his plot. They carried little sacs of moisture inside their bodies to survive this brutal heat. He caught them by the handful, pressing their sacs to save every single drop of water they held. He dug up clay and fired even more mud. Bricks because brick lasts, and it was the one building material the dry wind could never damage. Throughout all this hard labor, Ciola stayed right by his fire, healing slowly with her ribs still wrapped, watching him run his camp with those same cold, evaluating eyes she had arrived with, keeping quiet until the day she finally began to speak up. She spent those early days by his fire saying virtually nothing, watching closely like someone trying to decide if this new place was safe. But as she watched him work tirelessly through the scorching, dry winds, cutting back his own water sails to preserve his source while other owners sold dry, in a panic she began to open up. It started with small things, a better way to extract the beetle sacs, pointing out where his pond water flowed and where it stagnated. Soon, she shared bigger secrets, detailing the layout of Tio's entire operation, the specific water sources he had already dried up, and his exact sequence of actions. She was not making any grand announcements. She simply started sharing the heavy secrets she once kept locked away, and Ciola, who had originally arrived at his plot guarding her own name, was now handing him the entire map of her mind, one road at a time. Kang Tio also saw the dry wind coming, and being Tio, he saw it as the perfect chance to squeeze everyone dry. He had no use for basic supplies. Tio knew his lake would not dry, and his crew had already crafted everything weeks ago, but he bought up everything anyway, using his wealth to completely corner the market on vital materials that small-time pond owners needed to survive this harsh drought. The firewood, charcoal for filtering, and even the jars meant for storing water. He bought up every last piece so the weaker owners, watching their own ponds slowly shrink, could not by any means to fight back. Talk about an absolutely brutal, cold-blooded play. Already going dry, could not possibly build a filter with no charcoal in sight. Tio fully intended for the dry wind to do all his draining for him, killing off the smaller water sources first and softening up all the desperate owners. He gladly helped it along by snatching their tools before they could even reach them. But this scheme did not work on our guy, for the exact same reason none of his other moves had worked. He simply was not buying from Tio's controlled market. He spent 2 weeks learning to make everything himself. Firewood was pointless since he had mud brick, and those monopolized charcoal jars meant nothing. He had fish oil, shell powder, and a custom filter built for his own catches. He possessed clay pipes, moisture sacs, a hoard of dried food, and a deep cold pond that the wind had not yet figured out how to reach. Tio cornered a market he had abandoned a long time ago. Sure, those struggling small owners had his sympathy, but the man who taught him to need absolutely nothing from anyone represented 3 brutal years he would not wish on a single soul. Yet out here it was turning out to be his single most valuable asset. Soon, the dry wind taught everyone the exact lesson his little puddle had been trying to teach him since day one. That depth beats width every single time. A massive lake holds more water, sure, but it also offers more surface area for the searing wind to drink from. The shallow sources died first, but his pond was the complete opposite: small on the surface but incredibly deep, fed by underground pipes he had installed. So while neighboring lakes shrank at their edges and shallow ponds dried up, he decided to make the one bold play that would secure his water forever. He forced the pond deeper, poured in every single resource he had saved up, hoarding them for this exact critical moment. The coins, depth stones, and cores were all sacrificed to trigger the upgrade. The clear pond became a deep fishing hole. This massive transformation brought everything he had hoped for, along with some unexpected bonuses. The water level dropped, tightened, grew icy cold, and the wind lost its grip. You simply cannot evaporate what you cannot reach, since the surface area was small. The surface of the deep hole was tiny, but the depth was absolutely immense. While regional waters vanished, his source settled in, becoming far safer than ever. He had turned the absolute worst starting source into one the drought could not touch. The system chat still ranked him dead last, and honestly, we loved to see it. There is a unique satisfaction in owning the only working well in a desert. While the arrogant people who mocked him watched their own oceans turn to mud, he kept his expression completely flat. Crowing in a market only invites future trouble. So he let them believe nothing had changed, yet deep under all the labor the part of him that saw rank 8.4 billion next to his name. Finally looked at it again, he was officially dead last in the global rankings. Yet he possessed the only water source that this drought could never destroy. He finally knew what he was sitting on, and his rival was beginning to fear it too. But this upgrade opened up far more than just a deeper, safer pond. The shadows at the bottom went down much deeper than any dungeon he had ever known. A dark abyss where light could not reach, as a new prompt glowed coldly over the water. An entirely new feature the system had never shown him before monster catch mode. He did not fully understand what that meant until he felt the first massive movement. His deep fishing hole was finally large enough to hold things the clear pond never could. This new mode was the system's way of warning him that his pond had officially graduated. Monsters lurked in the depths now, massive boss creatures of seasonal rank. The kind of catch that paid out a massive fortune, but could easily end a careless life. And the first beast announced its arrival before his gear was even remotely ready. The harsh, dry wind had forced his hand early, leaving his defenses weak. He still had the same fragile fence and basic spear, both damaged from the Rod Eater fight. The catch forecast gave him a glimpse of what was heading his way. Then the system did something totally unprecedented. It went partially blind. He could only make out a massive grass-jaw catfish, the largest creature his pond had ever held. The giant sat on the muddy bottom guarding something, but the forecast could not identify it. It was completely locked, displaying nothing but a faint, mysterious outline on his screen. A legendary silver chest that even the system itself seemed entirely unsure of. He knew that whenever the system went quiet, something incredibly important was waiting. An unreadable chest guarded by a terrifying boss monster at the bottom of his pond. This silent mystery was the loudest call to action he had ever faced. Whatever was inside had been placed there deliberately, much like the pipe in the door. But the treasure sat right beneath the monster, and the catfish was not going to move. To get it, he had to slay the beast first, but his current gear simply was not ready. He worked furiously to upgrade, reinforcing his basic rod with tough Rod Eater materials. Then he spun the reinforced weed fibers into a line capable of surviving a massive pull. He crafted sturdy shell boots to keep his footing secure on the slippery, dry mud. Finally, he assembled a proper spear, binding sharp fishbones and Rod Eater teeth to a heavy shaft. This weapon was a massive leap forward from the simple reed he used to kill the eel. Fortunately, he was not fighting alone, so I sent over a special batch of her custom bait. A highly concentrated ground paste designed to lure out the absolute biggest predators. It reeked of wounded mud shrimp, practically begging the massive beast to bite. Meanwhile, Ciola sat at the edge. Despite her rib injuries, she could read the water flawlessly. She positioned herself to monitor the entire area, keeping watch over the whole pond at once. With everything set, he baited the hook deep and waited for the grass jaw to rise. Slowly, the massive creature emerged from the abyss, a gigantic slab of pure muscle. It was wider than he was tall, boasting a cavernous mouth that could swallow an entire arm. With a single sweep of its tail, it displaced more water than his old puddle ever held. The giant struck the bait, the line snapped tight, and the life-or-death battle began. Within 10 seconds, this aquatic monster achieved what the night beast never could. It completely shattered his fence, destroying the brick wall with a single thrash. The fired brick wall he worked so hard to build was instantly reduced to rubble. The catfish breached the surface, pulling with insane force as the reel screamed in protest. His shell boots began to slip on the wet mud as the beast tried to drag him under. It was the very death the dry wind had been pushing him toward. He had just won. Second to avoid it, he anchored, throwing the line around a buried rock. That had held everything since the eel. The rock took the brutal pull instead. Of his body and his boot stopped sliding at the very water's edge. For a moment, it was just the two of them pulling against the rock, the catfish. Threw its whole weight into the line into stone, and stone into the ground. He knew if any single one of those three failed, the rock or line or his footing, the grass jaw would drag him under before his next breath. The reinforced weed line held, though a catfish whisker would have held better, but he had not spun it yet. You fight with the gear you finished, not the gear you meant to. The line held, that was the difference between living through the morning and dying. The catfish rolled, beast that size rolls to drown whatever is hooked and break what holds. His depth sense felt the roll coming before his eyes could even track it. With no other choice, he jammed broken bricks from his smashed fence in a wall of rubble to block the massive turning weight. The catfish slammed into brick instead of open water. It couldn't finish the turn, but it tried again. It always tries again. A monster that big has no plan, only a body and an endless hunger. It kept throwing. The same roll and the same pull at him, because they had always worked on. Everything else it had ever caught, every roll spent on the brick was a roll it did not spend killing him. He let it tire itself stupid against the rubble while he held the line, watching for the only thing that mattered. And then he waited, because let's be honest, the kill is never in the fight. It lies in the single moment the beast opens up, and you don't get that moment by being strong. You get it by staying patient through the terror of a monster trying to kill you. Then Seola gave him the moment. She had been reading the water the whole time, the pressure, the gather of the catfish before a move. She called it before it happened. A warning that the monster was about to lunge, mouth open to swallow everything. Her warning and his depth sense landed together. The grass jaw surged, its mouth wide open, exposing the soft, vulnerable inside for half a breath. That was the only soft spot. He thrust his spear straight down its throat with all the weight the anchor had left him, holding on. The beast thrashed the last of the water out, then silence. It went completely still, sinking back. The pond was his again at last. He collapsed in the wreckage of his own wall, arms dead and boots full of thick mud. Seola stood at the rim, breathing hard from the sheer effort of reading a fight she couldn't join. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say that the dead monster in the water wasn't already saying. She broke the silence first, saying in her usual flat tone that she had watched plenty of strong men fish for Tio, but never once saw anyone fight like that. Not strong, she clarified. She was careful to make clear she didn't mean strong, rather, she meant he had taken down a beast 10 times his size by making it small, turning his own broken wall into a trap, and waiting. Her eyes widened. She had never once thought to fish like this before. He shrugged, explaining that starting with a simple puddle was his only path to victory. She stared at the deep, freezing water where a muddy pit once sat. Then she looked at the shattered fence and back at him. This was the moment. She stopped seeing a simple worm farmer. She saw what he truly was. The slain grass jaw yielded the single biggest haul he had ever harvested. Rewards popped up from the system one by one. First, a mountain of meat. Enough to fill his drying rack 3 times, enough to feed him for months. Then came a massive monster core, far heavier and warmer than the rod eaters. This was pure, concentrated wealth. The system also granted him 30 lake coins, more than his earnings from the entire migration combined. Then, a catfish whisker. A line so incredibly fine and strong, he could never spin it himself. But the next drop changed everything. A legendary blueprint fragment floated up. He read the details and froze. It belonged to a unique fishing rod. Not basic, not reinforced, unique. This tier was a legend in the chat. Only a handful of elite, hyperlucky survivors had ever managed to reach it. The kind of legendary tool that completely rewrites what you can catch. Even as a fragment, it promised that the other pieces were close by. He sat holding the scrap, lost in thought for far too long. A dead beast in his pond, a ruined fence, and hidden watchers gathering. Unseen watchers gathered, but his mind was fixed on that unique rod. The very weapon the strongest survivors built their entire power around. This was the tool to turn an ordinary fisher into a true legend. It came out of a pathetic mud puddle the chat used to mock. He had long stopped being surprised by his water. Now he just craved more. The fragment promised the rest was near, and that was all the motivation he needed. His second treasure was the chest, a locked silver vault defying his radar. It rose slowly from the depths, where the giant catfish once guarded it. Cold, heavy, and tightly sealed. When he touched it, the system warned him. The chest demanded a high price to open, and it did not want coins. It required another incredibly rare monster core, just like the one he had fought to harvest. The lock had to be fed, but while he had 1 core, the chest demanded 2. He was certain the missing unique rod pieces were locked inside. He was incredibly rich. Rich yet totally stuck. He held the migration's absolute greatest haul. But he could not access the ultimate prize because monster cores are incredibly rare. His pond was empty, and another grass jaw would not spawn overnight. To progress, he would have to lure a new beast out of the dark. But his gear was in far worse shape than before his last battle. It was a brutal, endless cycle. He needed the core to open the chest. Without that unique rod, hunting the next beast would be an absolute nightmare. He was trapped inside this loop with a ruined fence and damaged spear. His destroyed fence was the worst part. His primary defense was completely gone. The wall that successfully kept the night beasts away was now rubble. Its mud bricks were cracked and the protective sharp teeth knocked loose. He had a massive, gaping hole in his defenses, right when he needed them most. Rebuilding fired brick takes time the dry wind and a circling rival would never give him. But he started the repairs anyway, because staring at the gap would not close it. Ciola helped as much as her injured ribs allowed, handing him what he needed. They read the pond together, working into the dusk against a still broken wall. The wall would not be whole by dark. Suddenly, Ciola froze right at the rim. She stopped mid-motion, brick in hand, and stared out across the dry grass. With her sharp eyes, she had spent a whole migration learning to spot Tio's scouts. She saw them first, out past the edge of his plot, low in the grass. Watchers lurked in the failing light, first 2, then 3 of them. They held a tense, impatient stillness that was definitely not resting, Tio's men. They made no move to enter, nor did they shout insults across the chat. They simply stood there, watching, counting, and measuring everything he owned. They sized up his fence, his pond, and his gear with calculating eyes. They were mapping out exactly what they would have to break. Ciola whispered it. She was absolutely right. This was the tense look that always comes before a raid. Tio had tried to buy his water source and failed, then tried slandering it. But now he had seen too many rare drops pulled from this supposedly dead puddle. He wanted it for himself and sent scouts to calculate the cost of taking it. They stared at his damaged fence, his deep monster pond, and his locked chest. Talk about an absolute worst-case scenario, right on the edge of a massive drought. The enemy was doing the math, and he had to do the same. Counting only his own strength and ignoring theirs was a quick way to lose. They would not strike tonight. 3 scouts do not storm a fenced pond. Even a broken fence held by a man they assumed was rank 8 billion. They were here to observe, not to attack. The real invasion would come later. They would pick a night once they measured how thin his wall really was. And how exhausted the dry wind had left him. He had a little time. Just enough to pull a second monster from the deep, opening that silver chest. He needed to craft the unique rod and become far too dangerous to touch. He stared back at them across the swaying grass, holding a heavy brick. He let them keep counting, making absolutely no effort to hide the gaping wall. They had already seen it, and chasing them off would only bring back more. Frightened men return in force. Patient men should be left to underestimate you. He quietly noted their positions, utilizing the same careful habits that saved him before. The same focus that trapped Tio's buyers and navigated the dungeon floor. He went back to laying bricks in the dimming light as wind whipped around. The watchers remained still, somewhere deep beneath his feet in the freezing dark. Where the massive catfish had come from, a sealed silver chest waited. It required a second beast he had not yet caught, while enemies waited to strike. They settled into the dry grass, waiting for the night his wall was weakest. He couldn't just wait around, it was time to dive straight into danger. With a smashed fence at his back, and Tio's scouts tracking his every move, the trap of his entire situation was laid out painfully plain. The silver chest demanded a second monster core before it would ever open. And the legendary rod he desperately needed was locked right inside. He had to make do with his own gear instead of the chest. Meanwhile, the watchers sat in the grass counting. Every single hour he spent fishing meant his broken wall stayed open, leaving his camp as an easy target they were sizing up. He really wanted to wait for the perfect moment, but trapped like this, he had to admit the next moment was his only shot, so he took it. Ready or not, he literally split his focus in 2, half prepared to fish, the other half prepared to get robbed. He knew a raid was coming. Ever since Cola spotted those watchers, and a threat seen coming is something he could easily prepare for, he built a plain, obvious decoy chest right the mouth of his tent where any thief would look first. Then he packed it with absolutely nothing of value, just dried fish and some worthless shell scraps. Disguised as a hidden treasure hoard, the real valuables were buried and scattered. Spots a raider working fast in the dark would never think to dig, and around the broken section of his fence, the obvious gap they would use to slip inside. He started laying a special kind of welcome, reserved only for guests he truly hated. But what was in that trap is for later. First, he had to get that rod. To earn it, he had to catch the monster in his pond that literally ate fishing lines. The system identified the beast as a blade fin carp, it was not the largest creature in the deep, but death sense warned him it was easily the meanest, a long, lame fish, with fins sharp enough to slice clean through a strong line without even slowing down. That was its entire trick. It would not fight the hook but slice it free and leave him holding a limp line with an emptier pack. Hooking it normally meant losing rig after rig until he finally gave up. The pond edge where it swam was a place where careless hands easily lost fingers too. Those blade fins spinning just below the surface. He had to catch it without his catfish whisker line getting sliced on the very first run. She had already thought ahead. The special bait she sent down was not her typical wounded shrimp paste. That stuff drove things crazy, and a frenzied blade fin carp would thrash wildly at everything, including him. Instead, she sent a much calmer bait to bring the fish in slow and steady rather than fast and slashing. She explained the strategy openly because she had stopped charging him for the secrets behind her recipes after their third trade. A slow carp, she advised, cuts less, giving him precious time to set up properly. A fast one simply bleeds you dry. Even slowed down, it cut his first line instantly, which he fully expected and planned for. Here is the truth about a fish that cuts lines: it teaches you not to offer anything you care about losing. So he gave it a line he already planned to retire. He rigged his old basic rod, the one he relied on right after the gotcha rod, the gear that carried him from eels to catfish. He cast it out, not to actually land the carp, but to sacrifice the line. The carp took the bait, sliced the line clean with ease, and immediately turned to run. By turning, it committed to a path right along the pond edge, and that exact edge was where he had laid the rest of the trap. He had loosened 2 fence posts around the gap and drove new ones close together, creating a tight brick channel the carp had to swim through to reach deep water. It headed straight for the channel, razor fins fully flared. And the moment its body was between the posts, he drove a third barrier down behind it, pinning the giant carp in a narrow brick channel barely wider than its body. That lethal cutting edge was useless against walls. It could not slice through fast enough to make a difference. The beast went mad, thrashing itself violently against the brick on both sides. Blade-like fins shrieked against fired clay, carving deep grooves into walls that refused to break. For a tense moment, he worried the barrier would snap under a beast this furious, but they held. Brick does not bleed, tire, or care how sharp you are. That was exactly why he fought every threat from behind solid defenses. The carp could shred a net, a fishing line, a careless hand, or anything that gave. It could not slice a wall that refused to budge, and unyielding walls were the one thing in this strange world he had mastered building. The trapped beast did the unexpected. It leaped. The bladefin carp launched itself straight out of the water toward his chest. All those razor fins fanned out, spinning straight for his throat. Talk about a terrifying leap. If a creature cannot slice through its cage, it will try to shred the one who built it. His fish skin vest and shell guards could absorb a standard strike, but they would never survive a throat shredded by blades. He could not let it land. Bracing his trusty fishbone spear with all his strength, he met the diving carp midair. The weapon drove deep behind the blade fins, exactly where his depth sense located the beast's soft spot. Its own momentum impaled it on the tip harder than any thrust. For half a second, its entire weight hung on the spear. The rush of wind from those spinning blades brushed his cheek as he kept the shaft locked against the stone, letting the monster's own panic finish the job. Finally, it crashed onto the brickwork, impaled by the very weapon that had snapped dozens of his previous lines. The thrashing slowed. The second monster core was secured. Exhausted, he slumped against the fence and stared at the massive carcass, noticing his ruined starter rod tangled nearby. He felt an unexpected twinge of emotion, an odd, quiet grief for a simple wooden rod. It was a reliable tool, the very first gear in this brutal world that actually obeyed his commands. He had sacrificed it to the carp's razor teeth on purpose to secure its replacement. It was the right trade, but he still felt bad. Who hasn't gotten attached to starting gear? If he felt nothing losing it, he would have forgotten its true value. He untangled the broken remains from the line, tossed them aside, and finally turned his attention to the silver chest. The second core clicked into the lock, and the chest his forecast system had failed to analyze finally popped open. He was absolutely right about the real treasure inside. Complete unique fishing rod blueprint. The missing piece of the grass jaw fragment glowed warmly in his hands, and the loot didn't stop there. A storage box blueprint appeared, vastly superior to the cheap wooden crates he had been crafting. Next, a rare lake pearl, which the system valued higher than any prior loot. He also found defensive plates to upgrade his fishskin vest into real armor. But one specific item stood out, highlighted in a completely different way by the system. It was marked rare and flagged as highly dangerous to carry, a puddle. Expansion token. Naturally, he crafted the unique fishing rod first, after surviving on a bent gacha hook, then a basic rod patched up with cheap repair oil. He was ready for a proper upgrade. He finally held the real deal. The unique rod felt light, perfectly balanced, and responded to his touch instantly. He finished the setup. The catfish whisker line ran clean off it. When he first cast into the dark, monster-filled waters of his own pond, it reached deeper and cleaner than any gear he owned. He knew the upcoming fights would be on a completely different level. For the very first time, he was not heading in with the worst gear. Next, he upgraded his armor vest, fitting strong new plates over the patched scrap. Then he crafted a few superior storage boxes, selling those rare blueprint copies directly into a market that desperately needed them during this brutal drought. The coins started rolling in steadily on top of everything else. That evening, he stood by the edge in real armor, holding his unique fishing rod above a deep, freezing pond teeming with beasts, finally letting himself pause. He had to measure how far his progress had come. He started with a bent hook and a hole of mud 3 weeks ago. Now this. None of it was luck, it was relentless math. Confront a deadly threat, survive it, and then turn its drops into the ultimate tool for the next challenge. The powerful rod in his grip was proof of his entire strategy, fragment by fragment, core by core, fight after brutal fight until the weakest survivor in the entire migration now held gear that most lake owners could never dream of touching. He did not feel safe, he felt ready. Out here, that was everything. So she knew something had shifted before he even spoke. She always did. His trades signaled exactly what his pond was turning into before he said a single word. And the day after he completed his unique rod, the resources he bought from her shifted toward much heavier bait. For massive fish, without asking a single question, she sent over new recipes and added a personal message of her own. For her, this was a massive speech. She warned that the worm farmer could no longer stay hidden. Once the entire region realized what was hiding in his water, he had better remember exactly who had been supplying him with bait since their second week. He messaged back that he kept track of everything, placing her right at the top of a very short list of allies he actually trusted. It was the absolute truth. Across a vast territory filled with strangers and hidden threats, he had exactly two: a scout recovering by his campfire, and a bait maker he had never even met in person. He began to realize these two individuals were far more vital to his survival than any rare blueprint he had ever found. As for the expansion token, he left it alone. Ciola called it a puddle expansion token, her eyes flat and empty with the gaze of someone who knew exactly what desperate people would do to each other over far less. It was the kind of rare treasure that got people killed. It would let him expand his pond, broaden his territory, and scale his entire domain instantly instead of grinding upgrades. One single core at a time, this tiny item held an unbelievable amount of power. The moment anyone discovered he held it, he would stop being a small target and become a prize worth killing for. Talk about high stakes. She had barely finished saying it, suddenly froze, staring out across the tall grass. There they were. Again, more of them, and much closer this time. Darkness was falling, so he hid the token. He avoided using the decoy chest or any obvious spot Raider would check. Instead, he buried it deep in a spot he marked only inside his own head. He then went back to setting up a deadly welcome around the fence gap. The hostile watchers had finally completed their cold calculations, and tonight they were coming to collect their prize. They advanced through the pitch-black night, fast and quiet. No real struggle. This time there were 5 of them, outnumbering the previous scouts. This proved Tio had decided the puddle was worth sending a real crew. They came through the gap in his fence because it was the obvious way, and he had let them believe it was the only way, moving right toward the tent and the decoy box sitting in plain sight. In the mouth of it, they smashed the old filter frame. On the way, the cracked first frame he had retired after building a better one. And he let them because he would only break his own heart trying to save every piece of what he owned. The filter frame was a piece he had already written. Off they grabbed the decoy box, and suddenly that gap in his fence stopped being a way in. It was now the worst place on his whole plot. He had spent the afternoon turning that ground into a thing that hurt. Fish oil poured thick across the slope they had to climb. so the first two went down hard, slid, and could not get their feet under them, mud pits hidden under dry dirt. The same soft sucking traps the dungeon had taught him. A third man put his leg deep, stuck fast, and started shouting. Hook lines were strung low across the dark where running men do not look, catching shins and wrists and shell. Powder, fine and sharp, worked into the oil in the mud, so everything that touched it ground and bit. He did not have to beat 5 men in a fair fight. And he would have lost a fair fight. He gave them a field of his own making in the dark, the same trick as the dungeon corner and the fence channel, and every fight he had one out here, picking them off the ground, one stuck, sliding. Bleeding man at a time, not a fight, a straight-up harvest they had come in fast and confident, and the ground took that away from them in the first 10 steps. A man on his back in fish oil is not a raider, he is a problem trying to stand up. One with his leg in a mud pit is not a threat, he is an anchor. He did not have to be brave or strong against any of them. He had to be the one person on that slope who knew where every trap was and could keep his feet, and since he had built the slope, he went down the line of them in the dark, the fishbone spear doing the work, taking the weapons out of the hands of men who could not get upright to use either. Ciola held the one lamp at the right angle, lighting them and not him, and that was its own kind of weapon. They could not see what was hitting them, they could only see each other going down. Raiders who came expecting to rob a helpless worm farmer found instead a dark full of oil, hooks, pits, and a fishbone spear coming out of the black. Did what frightened men always do once an easy robbery turns hard. They broke. 4 of them dragged themselves back out through the gap they had come in, leaving blood and a fake box behind. The 5th he kept. The one he kept was the one the mud pit had caught, stuck to the hip and going nowhere. He did not lay a hand on him. No need. The system has a thing for this. A captured raider can be made to answer through the market, a forced confession logged in the same record that tracks every trade. An item, the truth stamped, public, impossible to take back in exchange for whatever the system decides his freedom is worth. He put him to it in front of the whole regional channel where the cursed water lie had been told, and the verification token had killed it. The raider's own confession wrote itself into the record for anyone to read. Kang Teo had sent them. The point was not to. This was not some attempt to harass him or break a rival's trade. Teo had ordered a value assessment. He sent 5 men to find out exactly what was inside his fence, what gear, what stores, and what the puddle was actually worth, because he had watched far too many rare drops come out of dead last water. And get this, he had seen through that worm farmer cover story as clearly as anyone. The raid was not an attack, it was a pure appraisal. He was deciding if the source was worth the cost of a real takeover, and that logged confession told the whole region he had decided it definitely was. He stood there for a long moment, turning it over. For weeks that worm farmer cover story had been his armor, masking his true depth. The whole region kept laughing at the puddle, while he secretly dug it deeper underneath them. That armor had just cracked, though not completely. The chat still saw rank 8 billion. The scans still read the mask, but Kang Teo had stopped believing it entirely, and Teo was the only one who mattered, since he had actual men in the lake. And the sheer will to take whatever he wanted. The disguise had bought him everything he had built. It would not protect him much longer. His quiet appraisal. Time was running out, and he had felt it vanish completely tonight in a confession forced from a man stuck up to his hip in his own mud. That changed the shape of everything. He could have easily dealt with someone who only wanted to scare him off, but Teo saw his source as a prize worth stealing, which meant he would keep coming back with more until he got it, or it cost him too much. He let the captured raider go once the confession was finally logged on screen. Because a freed man carries a message back far better than a prisoner, and he wanted Teo to know his little assessment had been assessed right back. Then he stood in his trap field in the dark with 4 men's blood drying in the oil, facing one plain, brutal truth. The next attack would not be 5 men testing a fence. The next time would be Teo coming to seize the pond, so he made it harder to take. He had the rare lake pearl from the chest, a top-tier upgrade. Material he had never held before, and with Teo's hostile intent stamped in the public record, he was not going to sit and wait. He fed it to the source, along with the cores, the coins, and every resource he had been holding back, and forced the next upgrade, just as he had forced everything since the massive storm. Deep fishing hole upgraded to a monster pond. The water changed under him again, and this Time the transformation had real weight. The pond went deeper, darker, and somehow heavier. The cold rolling off it was stronger, and the system name was no longer mere description, but a flat warning to anyone reading it from across the grass. Monster Pond, a source holding season-rank qualities now, the kind of legendary water the strongest survivors in the region built their power on. He kept his expansion token completely buried and untouched through all of this, because the token would have grown. His holding wide and loud. What he wanted instead was to grow deep and quiet one. More time before Tio arrived. Deep water had saved him from the dry wind, giving him the giant catfish, the carp, and the legendary rod. It was the only bet he ever won out here. And he was not about to stop making it now. Sitting on that token was the hardest test of patience, because it was the single thing that could have made him massive overnight, and being big was exactly what this ruthless world respected, but big was also exactly what Tio was, and 3 weeks out here had already shown him that being big did. Nothing kept him from drowning, so the token stayed buried, his secret weight. A heavy secret waiting for the day he chose, while his pond only grew deeper. Hidden where no watcher in the grass could measure how deep his real strength ran. That monster pond had been his for less than a single day when it grew a dock post. It rose from the rim on its own, a thick, dark wooden post. The system placed it there without being asked, and he understood it as a marker. His waters had finally grown large enough to need a proper dock to stand on. A place to work over the abyss. It felt like a massive achievement. It did for about a minute. Then the center of the monster pond stirred. Something massive rose beneath the surface, casting a dark shadow over the entire deep. Instantly, his brief triumph vanished. His forecast and depth senses reached out together. They returned with a terrifying name that he could feel in his very bones. Mudcrown Turtle, a season-ranked boss. The system was brutally clear about this threat. Clearer than it had been since his arrival, a boss of this scale. It did not just live in the pond, it existed to judge it. Defeating it would evolve his source into something far greater, but failure meant ruin. It would crush his pond and everything he had built right back into the mud. The water had grown large enough to summon the arbiter of its fate. He should have been terrified. Deep down he was a season-ranked boss. It had crushed far stronger setups than his. One mistake. A wrong move would not just lose a fight, it would cost him everything. The entire territory he had bled 3 weeks to build, but fear was useful now. He had learned to read it. It told him to study the beast first. To use every day the turtle gave him before it made its move. Remembering the lesson the eel taught him on day 1, teeth buried in his hand. He would defeat the biggest beast in the water by waiting out its patience, pinning it into a corner and striking the exact second it exposed its weakness. Ciola saw his expression. She looked at the water, then back at the grass. Tio's spies had not gone home. She voiced the thought they both shared. Talk about terrible timing, or, if you look at it another way, absolute perfection. A season-ranked boss rising in his pond while Tio's scouts watched them. They sat in the dark grass, waiting to decide whether to strike and take everything. If he lost to the turtle, Tio would claim his dead home as mercy. But if he won, he would possess a pond that even his powerful rival would fear. He stood on his new dock post, overlooking the dead still water. It was the heavy silence that settles right before a massive storm breaks. He held his unique fishing rod. The buried token rested beneath his feet. The dark season he had not chosen was rising steadily out of the depths. So he began the only way he knew how, searching for its weakest point. A creature the size of a ship does not move quickly. That slow speed was the only mercy the giant turtle offered him. It lingered in the deep for an entire day, showing off its massive shell. The system called its crust of mud and stone a crown. He watched silently. He prepared to strike while studying its massive form. Time was his only asset. He heard the system warning and spent every single second preparing for battle. Instead of wasting time being afraid, he rigged his unique fishing rod with the catfish whisker line. Then he geared up in everything he had crafted since day 1, the fishkin. Vest fitted with new metal plates, strapping shell guards to both forearms, a crab shell guarded his chest, paired with grip gloves and shell boots to prevent slipping on the wet rim and falling into the dark water. Next, he mixed the strongest bait Soy had ever sent. A thick paste designed to drag the absolute monster of the deep straight to the hungry surface. With that ready, he finished the fence, a wall he had literally bled to build. It had cost him even more blood when the catfish smashed it. Finally, the last brick was set. He lined the top with razor-sharp rod-eater teeth because this structure was no mere barrier. It was going to be his weapon against the massive turtle. Nearby, Seola prepared herself. She stood right at the rim to read the pond, her ribs still heavily bandaged. But her senses remained incredibly sharp. Out past the tall grass, Tio's watchers gathered to see if this crazy worm farmer would get crushed by his very own water. Honestly, he did not mind having an audience. Let them gawk if he was about to do the impossible. He wanted witnesses there to see it, win or lose, and either way. The massive turtle was rising. Look closely, because ready or not, this was happening now. He did not sleep a wink that night. Nobody sleeps before facing a beast capable of crushing everything they own. Instead, he spent the dark hours checking his gear and feeding the fire, just like he had done on his very first night. He kept measuring what little he had against what the morning would demand. But back then he only had a bent hook in a muddy hole. Now things were different. He possessed a unique rod, a spiked wall, a reliable partner watching the water, and 3 solid weeks of training to slaughter beasts 3 times his size. Yet he was still the underdog. Fighting back was one thing, but against a seasoned boss. That razor-thin gap between underdog and helpless was his only lifeline. Then he cast the bait and summoned the beast. The creature rose, slow and terrifyingly massive. First came its colossal crown breaking the surface, then the flat bulk of its shell, followed by a clawed foot gripping the dock's edge as the whole pond shifted. The system had not exaggerated. Honestly, this massive beast was an absolute nightmare. A high-tier seasonal rank monster far larger than anything he had ever imagined. His first instinct was to drag it ashore and fight there, but that was a total suicide mission. He knew better than to try pulling a titan of that scale. After all, nobody pulls an entire boat out of the lake using a fishing rod. And this colossal turtle weighed far more than a boat. Trying to fight its raw weight directly would cost him the line, his arms, and his life in a single pull. So he did not challenge its muscle. Instead, he targeted its sheer size. That single, crucial difference was his only actual path to victory. To start, he forced the monster to collide with the fence. Setting the hook, he did not pull, he steered. He used the rod to turn its head, driving the bait and the pain exactly where he wanted that massive body to go, guiding it straight into his heavy brick wall. An apex beast that big cannot halt its momentum quickly when it slammed the fence. The solid brick absorbed the massive blow, leaving the titan stunned against an immovable object. The giant turtle was temporarily checked and dazed, locked against his strongest structure. Good old reliable brick, once again, the very wall that turned back night beasts. And pinned the giant carp now stood directly between him and a seasoned boss. He held on. Every time the giant turtle lunged, he guided its massive weight straight into the brick. Instead of him, still the beast almost got him twice, once a tail sweep smashed the dock, shattering the post he stood on, sending him crashing hard onto the wooden platform. The towering shadow of the turtle loomed over him, and only a desperate kick off the shattered brick threw him clear before the heavy shell slammed down right where his legs had just been. Another time, the entire pond surged as the beast dove, the violent suction nearly dragging him off. The muddy bank, his anchor rope, and a wild shout being the only things holding him back. He had never fought this hard just to stay alive, facing a monster that size. He was not even really fighting, he was just surviving, enduring the assault. Over and over, hoping the beast would tire of throwing its colossal weight against the brick. Before he ran out of energy to dodge, thankfully, Seola read the water for him. A creature that massive shifts the entire pond when it moves, and she felt the water pressure gather before the turtle even made a single move. Sensing the massive bulk preparing to roll, lunge, or pull, she called out every shift. A split second before it happened, he could never have tracked the whole monster alone. She kept her eyes on the water, he focused on the gap, and together they knew exactly where the weight was shifting. When she warned of a roll, he braced the brick. When she called out a pull, he had already moved back toward the anchor. He was never faster than the beast, even with her reading the deep, but he did not need to be, he just had to be in position when the massive thing arrived. Then he targeted the joints, a massive shell like that has to open somewhere to move. At the legs and neck where the soft hinges give way so the body underneath can walk, turn, or reach, those were his prime targets. And his fishbone spear was finally the perfect tool for the job. He did not stab the hard shell, which would only break the spear and expose him. Instead, he waited for the body to turn and a leg to drive. Watching for a driving leg to expose the soft hinge, The moment it opened, he sliced deep and backed away before the turtle could swing its massive weight around. He waited, and when it turned the opposite direction, he sliced the other side. Blood seeped slowly into the water. Slowing it down was all he needed because the turtle did not have to die quickly. It just had to die before he made a fatal mistake. That was the entire battle, hour after exhausting hour, slicing, backing away, waiting for the turn, cutting the other side, letting the brick absorb the rage, listening to Ciola's warnings to be exactly where the weight was not. It was not heroic, nor did it look like much, just a drenched hunter circling a wounded giant in a muddy, ruined pond, carving it up piece by piece and running for his life, but he had long stopped. Expecting his battles to look flashy, the wealthy lake owners in the chat fished their waters for mere sport, bragging in grand halls. He fished his waters to clear a debt, slow and stubborn, one hard-fought payment at a time, and the debt he was paying off was a powerful, seasoned boss. Now watch, the monster finally slips up first. Near the end, wounded, sluggish, and furious, it did what every cornered, armored beast in this world eventually does, the same desperate move the giant eel never lived to learn, but the shell-backed fish and carp had proven to him before. It reared back, lifting its entire front out of the water to crash its heavy crown in crushing bulk down on the dock, desperate to smash the tiny hunter who had been. It reared right up, exposing the one spot the crown could never guard. The soft throat underneath the lifted shell, the exact gap his depth sense predicted. His skill had flagged this spot since the battle began. Ciola shouted it out. At the exact millisecond, he drove his unique rod hook into that soft gap. He pulled hard with his entire weight. A basic rod would have snapped instantly or bent under this pressure, but his unique gear held, sinking deep inside. The monster crashed down awkwardly, throat hooked. Its own lethal crushing weight became its downfall. The beast slammed into the wooden dock with shattering force, splintering the heavy posts before finally going still. The quiet water settled over the carcass. Silence, only his heavy breathing echoed, alongside the gentle lapping of the waves. The seasonal boss lay dead in a mere puddle, but the rewards, incredible. Mudcrown dropped a haul that other lake owners would envy for an entire season. And to think this beast came from a simple hole. Then the loot appeared. A chest rose up, not silver but gold. Talk about an insane tier upgrade. This was his very first gold chest, warm, heavy, and perfectly sealed. Inside was a colossal turtle core, larger than both of his fists combined. It radiated dense power. Beside it sat a stack of thick shell plates, the best armor crafting material around. Then, a massive heap of lake coins. He held more coins than ever before. He also received a Mudcrown blueprint and a bundle of rare storm survival designs. These would sell incredibly fast. The market was always desperate for them. He also found a unique seasonal token. Though its exact purpose remained unclear, he would find out soon enough. That evening, he immediately crafted the Mudcrown armor. The work was intense. Layering those thick shell plates over his vest provided unmatched, elite defense. He quickly sold the storm survival bundle, and the profits flooded in. However, he held onto the giant boss core. This was far too valuable to waste on a single upgrade. But then wait, he spotted something. Etched into the surface of the core was a faded but clear engraving. A strange spiral symbol, slashed through with a straight line. He recognized it immediately. He had seen this exact mark once before, deep on the root door of his first dungeon. That manufactured door should not have existed in a world only 3 weeks old. Yet this boss turtle carried the exact same emblem as that ancient door. A structure built by unknown hands before anyone arrived. He rotated the core slowly, feeling the cold dread of that ruined rod room rising within him again. It was all a single mystery wearing different masks. The manufactured place existed deep below. It had a creator's signature, and that signature branded the monster, which rose from his pond. The pieces connected perfectly, but he absolutely hated it. If the abyss was an engineered construct, then these beasts were not wild monsters at all. They were wardens, the rod-eater lurking among the shattered gear, the catfish guarding a locked chest his forecast could not decipher, and this turtle, bearing the architect's brand, appearing when his pond grew too deep for comfort. Each warden was stronger than the last, standing as a barrier between him and some ancient secret that had been buried with extreme care. This was no simple fishing game. He was literally excavating a massive tomb. And the grave guards only grew deadlier the deeper he went. He put the core away. That information didn't fit in a mind that was already filling up far too quickly for his liking. He turned to confront the greedy boss, making his sudden, desperate move. Kang Teo had watched the entire battle, and seeing a lowly worm farmer kill. Seasonal boss broke something deep within him that the prior water lies had only started. Now he understood exactly what the young man had spent 3 entire weeks trying to hide: the rare drops, the pristine water, the survival supplies, and even the dried food his own crew purchased in secret, plus a gold chest dropped by a seasonal turtle. Teo's monopoly was pure quantity, the endless common fish from his massive lake, but the young man was trading rare value out of a deep puddle, completely shattering any hope Teo had of dominating this specific market. He could not buy him out, slander his name, or even rob him, so he reached for his very last option, a tool that absolutely didn't care how strong. Grown, he activated a seasonal token, the exact same kind. Turtle dropped into his pack, causing a massive regional announcement to immediately pop up, bearing both their names, starting a highly public, system-binding water source duel right there. Was fully system-binding, with the devastating stakes written clearly beneath both names. The loser's precious water source would be claimed entirely by the winner. Teo forced the fight before the boy could recover, before securing his loot, and before he had finished crafting his new turtle armor. He targeted his weakest moment, hoping to steal his mud hole and humiliate him in front of the entire region. Teo made it public on purpose, wanting this defeat to be a massive show. But here is the massive twist that Teo completely missed because the appraisal skill had spent 3 weeks feeding false data to every scan. Teo was completely blind. He only thought he knew the source's worth, but this duel was about to reveal everything. This confrontation didn't pit muscle against muscle, or lake against lake, which was the only fight Teo could actually win, but the system itself was about to judge them. It compared both their resources on every single metric that truly mattered in this harsh migration, showing the actual numbers on screen one line at a time. The entire region went completely silent. First up was clean, filtered water, sold daily without a single failed test. The worm farmer easily crushed his rival. Teo's lake was wide but ruined by foul dry winds, while the puddle stayed clean. Next was rare catch value. His massive collection of elite monster cores completely overshadowed Teo's endless bins of basic common fish. It wasn't even close. Then came blueprint contributions, every unique design the young man had created to keep survivors alive. Filters, storage, and repair oil stood against Teo's basic trout, sold 10,000 times over. Finally, combat catch records showed records. The system registered a solo pond owner who had slain giant eels, armored fish, massive catfish, and a tier seasonal boss entirely on his own. Next came shelter, security, utility, and overall survival rank. Line after line, the protagonist's score skyrocketed, while Teo's metrics remained completely flat on his side. This happened because Teo built wide, but the worm farmer had built deep. The system measured true quality, while the chat only laughed at size. Now, as the final score settled, the mask was about to come right off. He had anticipated this moment ever since extracting the raider's confession. A system-binding duel meant he couldn't delay his secret any longer. The appraisal skill hiding his real depth from every scan failed to conceal it from the duel itself. The system laid his true value out in the open, all of it. The depth he had buried, the cores he had pulled, the worth of a source that read rank 8 billion on every casual scan, scoring like nothing the region had ever seen. When it finally counted for real, for 3 weeks the chat had ranked him dead last. And drawn pictures of his puddle. Now, the same chat watched the system's own numbers and understood that the worm farmer they had laughed at had been outvaluing the owner of a private sea since the second week. He won. The system said it plainly in the same flat voice it used for everything, with no ceremony at all. And then it did the thing that mattered more than the winning, which was that it had declared all of that in public, and it could not be unsaid. The mockery did not just stop, it turned into something he trusted even less. Actual respect, and under that respect, pure fear. Suddenly the buyers answered him and sent offers. Survivors who had repeated the cursed water lie went quiet, then went looking to trade. The worm farmer name stuck, but the joke drained out of it. It became the name of the one who had fooled the whole region and taken its money while it laughed at his coat, and that kind of name gets said with a very different weight. Teo kept his lake because the duel only took a source if the loser could not cover the margin, and he was rich enough to pay. down rather than lose his water, but he lost the only thing his whole power had ever rested on, the idea that biggest was best, that the man with the most water was the man who mattered. Everyone had seen the score now. His whole power was being the biggest, and that power did not survive the day the system put his numbers over Tio's in front of 8 billion people. He did not gloat. Even then, even with the whole region finally seeing it, gloating is for men who need the crowd's opinion, and he had stopped needing it somewhere around the first storm. But it must be said, the number landed somewhere in him that the rank 8.4 billion had landed 3 weeks before, and this time it landed the other way. Dead last had been a fact he put down and walked away from. This was a fact too, the system's own count, public and stamped, impossible to argue. That the worst source in the migration had become one of the best. He allowed himself to savor it for about as long as he had let himself feel warm by that first fire, 10 seconds, and then he set it down too because Tio was still out there with him. Like a crew and a new and dangerous reason to hate him. Humiliated men are more dangerous than confident ones. He had just humiliated the biggest man. The region in front of everyone he ruled, and a smart man does not celebrate that, he prepares for it. The wind did more than humble Tio, it moved his pond. The duel was a seasoned duel, and winning one the way he did, dead last. Beating a small sea on pure value, met a condition the system had been holding over his water since the turtle died. Suddenly, his monster pond began to change. The surface darkening, the deep opening wider, and the system wrote the new name in the pale light over a thing that had been a sour brown puddle 20-some days ago. Monster Pond upgraded, chest pond, a chest pond. The name told him what it was. Before he felt it, a source that now held what monsters guard, treasure water. Pond that paid in chests on top of fish. He stood on his cracked dock and looked. He stared deep. The bottom was entirely gone, swallowed by dark water. He barely noticed. The useless trash he received on day one had quietly transformed into a powerhouse. Honestly, the chat still refused to believe it. He now held one of the richest resources in the entire region. It really felt like the system had a pretty cruel sense of humor. The joke was on everyone but him. Ciola stood beside him, staring at the altered water. She finally voiced what the chat would struggle to accept. He was no longer just some desperate survivor scraping by. She said it in her usual flat tone. He had built a pretty massive power. The kind of power dangerous men like Tio notice and hunt down. Those numbers painted a giant target on his pond. Talk about high stakes. Winning that duel had not kept him safe. It made him a prize. It proved to everyone watching exactly how valuable he actually was now. He already knew this, but it is one thing to know a fact, and another to hear a trusted ally say it beside the dark water. While his earlier upgrades had settled, the chest pond did not. Just a single day after his duel, the center water turned slow and dark. A strange current pulled downward, dragging toward the deep in an unnatural way. It had absolutely nothing to do with the mysterious pipe Ciola had discovered. Kneeling down, he focused his depth sense on the water. The current had a strange color. A dark thread ran into the abyss, and the system suddenly flared. A terrifying notification stopped him cold. Treasure current open. The path led to an abyss beneath drowned houses. Seriously, think about that. The system had never used a word like houses for anything down here. Yet there it was. Deep down, he already knew the truth. Or at least half knew it. The text put vague thoughts into undeniable words. The buried clay pipe, the marked door, and that same carving on the core. This was a place built by human hands, buried under the grass. Now the system was showing him that the path ran through his pond. It led straight into the dark ruins where people once lived. Ciola stood at the edge and scanned the dark current with her senses. Her expression turned completely still and distant, just like over the pipe. She murmured that she had felt similar currents under Tio's oldest sources. But back then she was ordered to stop asking questions, and she had never once heard the system speak of houses down in the deep. They both stood there, facing a current pulling into a forgotten, drowned world. This happened on the exact day he became visible enough for Tio's wrath. An abyss was opening beneath his feet, holding answers to every dark mystery. He stared at the swirling black thread in his water, and then at the turtle's marked core inside his pack, then out toward the high grass. Tio's watchers still waited. He was clearly standing on something absolutely massive. This was far bigger than any mere fishing migration. The path forward led straight down into the pitch black, right under those drowned houses. The secrets had been waiting for someone desperate enough to dig to the bottom. Before plunging into the dark abyss, he decided to open the gold chest. He could not climb into a drowned world using yesterday's gear, the turtle's chest. Provided the exact tools he would need for his destination, and he had a strong feeling the system knew it, a skin of deep lamp oil that burned slow and steady, resisting the water. There was also a better length of rope, longer and stronger than the line he had used since dealing with the eel, and a bait the system called a depth pearl, a small, hard object that smelled like absolutely nothing to him, but it was a feast for whatever lived at the bottom of the world. He built gear around the rest and packed for a long, heavy dark. Let's be real here, this treasure current felt absolutely nothing like the standard dungeon. That level 1 dungeon in the rod room had been relatively close and contained. It was a short drop, a familiar dark, a place he could quickly climb out of if things went wrong. The treasure current was a different beast, a thread of freezing black water swirling right through the floor of his pond into an abyss with no detectable bottom. The moment he lowered himself into that void, he knew he was leaving the familiar world behind. The light of his pond quickly shrank above him, until it was a tiny coin, then a spark, then nothing. The water grew heavy, old, and so cold it ached. Down was the only direction left, down past where the rod room had been, down past anything his pond had ever shown him, right into the abyss. The system called beneath the drowned houses. He secured his rope the only way he trusted, tying 3 knots to a buried rock, and counted his line by arm span as he slowly sank, fully aware that everything that could kill him down here came down to 3 things: the rope, his only way home, the light, which was the only thing keeping the dark from becoming total, and the precious air in his lungs draining faster the deeper he went. He could fight off a monster, but he could not fight a snapped rope, a dead lamp, or his own failing lungs, and so he went slow, checking all 3 factors at every depth, refusing to let the dark rush him. The abyss does not kill with teeth, it kills with sheer distance, by being farther from the sun than his rope, light, or breath could ever reach. Then it let the teeth finish what the distance started. There is a specific fear that only comes with depth, and he met it on his descent. In the upper dungeon, he had always been able to feel the surface, knowing a few hard pulls on the line would bring him back to safety. Down here, that comfort vanished. There was absolutely no surface left, only endless, freezing dark below and a thin, fragile thread of rope above. Somewhere in the freezing cold, his mind kept suggesting that the rope was already too long, that he had gone way past the point where any line could be trusted. The smart, safe move was to climb back up while the lamp still burned. He did not climb back, but noted the thought, fear that talks sense is the most useful fear of all. And it was telling him the cold truth about exactly how far from safety he could get before this absolute dark turned from a temporary visit into a permanent home. And then the current let him out into a room, not a cave, a room. He had braced himself for a rough cavern with muddy roots and packed earth. Instead, the treasure current opened up to show perfectly straight walls, meeting at clean corners. It had a floor, or what used to be a floor and was now ceiling, because the entire room hung upside down in the deep, freezing water. Upside down, a table drifted right above him, legs pointing toward the dark. Overhead, chairs nosed against the ruined ceiling. Along one wall stood cupboards, old wooden, doors hanging open or swinging slowly in the silent current. Through gaps where the wood had finally given up, fish swam freely, nesting inside the dark cracks of a silent structure built only for human hands. He moved slowly, his lamp cast a small, pale circle of light across ancient surfaces, untouched since long before this current world had even existed. The wood was soft and black with water, but it had not rotted, preserved by the deep, freezing cold, so that every single thing kept its shape. A bowl still sat quietly on a shelf, held fast in place by silt. Nearby, an inner wall and a door hung loosely on a single hinge. Then he saw a smaller chair among them, low, built for a child. He stared longer than he should have, before forcing himself to look away. Some facts are easier carried if his mind did not put a face to them. He knelt in the icy water. Alone in his own cold, black abyss, he knew exactly what lay before him. It was a place he had come from, having lived in rooms just like this. He had sat at tables like that in a life now feeling 100 years gone. A world of warm kitchens and normal chairs, but here it was. At the bottom of a pond in a world the system swore was only 3 weeks old. Fully furnished, once lived in and drowned, a real home, not an artificial ruin. Someone had eaten at that table and kept their things in those cupboards. And then the water had come, or the world had ended, dragging everything down. Suspended upside down in the deep, waiting for a dead fisherman to find. He had spent 3 weeks calling his small puddle the worst luck in the migration. Standing in this drowned room, he was not so sure, honestly, who would be. The lucky ones up in the sun got wide, bright waters. Just mud and fish, they would brag, never knowing what their world sat on. But he had been given this tiny puddle, the only place deep enough to force him all the way down to the floor where the truth slept. Was this the worst luck in the migration, or the only luck that mattered? By now, he suspected those two things were exactly the same. The broken rods in the rod room had been the very first whisper. The pipe was the second, and the turtle's sigil the third. This was no whisper. This was the entire truth standing before him, with its doors swinging open. An old world had lived here, in homes with tables and cupboards, until something drowned the whole thing, burying it beneath a grassland. They called the grassland new. They said they were dropped to fish. Lies, they were dropped on a massive grave with the furniture still inside. He did not have long to ponder this grim reality of the world. Because this house was not empty, something living down here felt him arrive. The drowned Nailish came first, creeping out from the dark corners. Pale, blind creatures, edged with brutal spines all along their backs. Long bone-like nails flared up to strike, hunting by sensing the water pressure. Meaner and faster than any dungeon fish, they charged at him. His mudcrown armor earned its keep the very second they struck. Spines that would have ripped him open a week ago slide right off his turtle shell guards. He drives his fishbone spear straight through the monsters that dare to push their luck. His heavy armor deflects the remaining blows while he keeps his back glued to a solid wall. He exposes as little of himself to the black water as possible, and they keep coming. There are far more swarming beasts here than any blindfish in the dungeon. They feel no fear. For a long, brutal stretch, he stands alone against a drowned wall. In the freezing dark, he works the fishbone spear with short, deadly, controlled strokes. He slays one and parries two, refusing to let any slip behind him into the pitch black. Out here, blindness means death. He knows he cannot win this fight by slaughtering them all. There are simply too many. His only choice is to hold his ground and keep moving forward. He presses toward the submerged cupboards he came for, trusting his heavy armor for protection. It has to absorb whatever his spear cannot block. This is the reality of fighting in the abyss. It is not about glorious victory. It is raw survival in the freezing dark with a lifeline. You hold out until you grab the loot and escape, but then come the chest leeches. These parasites do not strike fast. They just drift with agonizing patience through the water. They latch onto a stray arm or leg, clamping down tight to slowly feed on him. When 3 of them latch onto him in the freezing dark, his precious blood begins to drain. He cannot afford to lose strength with a long rope climb ahead. He must act fast. He burns them off with his sealed flame, one by one, quickly learning a harsh lesson. He must watch the slow-drifting threats just as closely as the fast-striking predators. Down here in the deep, the silent killers are always far more lethal than the loud ones. The next challenge is even stranger. A massive clam sits resting in the dark corner of the room. It guards the most promising half-open cupboard. This giant mollusk is literally the size of a door. Its massive shell is cracked open slightly, mimicking an inviting path into the deeper darkness. His depth sense warns him of the subtle danger before his eyes can even make it out. The monster is lying in wait, a massive predator sitting right where a diver would reach. There is no way it is just resting. It is a deadly, living trap with a massive mouth. He survived a similar encounter in the rod room once, and that painful lesson still holds true. He refuses to put his bare hands anywhere near it. Instead, he grabs the abyss nail hooks. After securing one of those salvaged hooks to his spear, he cautiously reaches inside the cabinet. Using the long tool to search the darkness lets him keep his physical hands entirely safe. Instantly, the clam snaps shut on the hook and the empty space where his arm should be. The sheer force would have cleanly severed his arm at the elbow, while it slowly struggles open again. He quickly snatches the loot from the cupboard and retreats, leaving the beast grinding on empty water. It will still be there gnashing when he returns. He knows the deep ocean never clears itself. Every single danger he leaves alive on the way down is something he must face again later. A smart diver never risks losing a hand to a trap they can clearly see ahead of them. It is a simple rule that has kept all 10 of his fingers safely attached out here. The deep will not change his mind. He clears the room the slow, highly calculated way. This is the only survival method the deep permits. The silk-covered cupboards finally yield their hidden treasures. The loot is far superior to anything the normal dungeon yields, crucial abyss nail hooks. They are harder than rod-eater teeth. He gets a full set and a waterproof storage blueprint. He understands its immense value the moment he inspects it, in a world submerged in water. Next is an old, freezing iron key. It feels far heavier than a normal key should. It is clearly cut for a mysterious lock deeper inside the house, plus some drowned ancient coins. Old coins from a forgotten era, not minted by the system. He also found a torn map piece. It did not show just one room, but a whole row of them. A passage led past the house. More rooms lay beyond. An entire sunken structure stretched far out into the pitch black. And inside a cupboard that had somehow survived the crushing water, he spotted a sealed jar of grain. He climbed back up before his rope snapped. That was the discipline the abyss demanded above everything else, the one rule most likely to get a greedy diver killed. There is always one more cabinet to search, always another reason to stay for. The next dive, besides, his rope had been sitting in freezing, moving water for too long, and his lamp was running dangerously low, his chest heavy from the pressure. If he stayed for just one more cabinet, the chat channels would stop hearing his name forever, so he climbed, pulling himself up line by line, leaving the cold, drowned house in the freezing blackness behind, until the tiny spark of light above grew into the shape of a coin, then broke open into the blinding surface. He dragged his exhausted body onto the dock and eagerly breathed the fresh air of a world still remaining above the surface. On dry land, he built a waterproof storage container first, then sold copies of the blueprint to a market where people lived half their lives completely soaked. The coins rolled in easily now that the whole region knew the worm farmer's salvage was real, but he kept the grain. He did not sell it, nor did he open it, a sealed jar of grain. Still dry, still untouched, from a house that sank before their long migration ever started, was worth far more to him as proof than any meal or sale. It proved that the abyss was not just filled with deadly currents and ancient ruins. It was a world of kitchens, where people stored food for a winter that the rising tides reached first. Long before winter did.